Yo, what's up everyone? It's Watch Harry, and today we're checking out, Klaus Mikaelson found Harry at Gringotts and the original hybrid made him heir to every vampire lineage. Drop a like if you're hyped. Subscribe for daily content. Let's get this story started. Chapter 1, The Boy in the Vault. The pole had been there for 3 days. Klaus Mikaelson had lived for 1,000 years, and in that time he had learned to trust exactly 3 things: his own instincts, his family's loyalty when it wasn't being actively tested, and the particular weight of old magic when it pressed against him like a hand on his chest. He had ignored the feeling for the first day, dismissed it on the second, and on the third day he had snapped at Elijah over breakfast in a way that sent coffee cups rattling across the table, at which point Elijah had set down his newspaper, regarded Klaus with the expression of a man who had seen this particular tantrum in several different centuries, and said, very calmly, "Go and find whatever it is before you destroy the kitchen." So Klaus went to London. Not because Elijah told him to. He was very clear about that, internally. He arrived in the city on a Tuesday morning in July, stepping out of a black car onto a cobblestone side street that smelled of rain and old stone, wearing a dark jacket over a grey shirt and carrying nothing except the patience he'd spent a millennium cultivating and the irritation that 3 days of inexplicable restlessness had stripped nearly bare. London suited him in a way most modern cities didn't. It was ancient enough underneath all its glass and noise. You could feel the layers of it if you stood still long enough, Roman stone under medieval mortar under Georgian brick, all of it breathing together in that particular way that only very old places did. He walked for 20 minutes before he realized he was heading somewhere specific. The pull sharpened as he moved through the city, directional now in a way it hadn't been from New Orleans, less like a general ache and more like a compass needle swinging hard north. He turned down a street he hadn't chosen consciously, then another, until he found himself standing in front of a white marble building that shouldn't have been where it was, too tall, too grand, sitting between 2 perfectly ordinary shops in a way that made the eye want to slide past it. Klaus didn't let his eye slide. He stood on the pavement and looked at it for a long moment. Gringotts Wizarding Bank. He knew what it was. He had dealt with the wizarding world in passing over the centuries. It was difficult not to, when you were something that existed so far outside their taxonomy that they couldn't decide whether to be afraid of you or fascinated. He had accounts here, in fact, opened in the early 1800s under a name he no longer used, maintained by Elijah with the quiet efficiency that Elijah brought to everything. He hadn't visited in decades. There was no reason he should be standing here now with every old instinct he possessed screaming at him to go inside. He went inside. The goblin at the first desk looked up at him with the particular expression goblins reserved for customers who were either very wealthy, very powerful, or very likely to cause a scene. After a moment's assessment, the goblin appeared to conclude that Klaus was probably all 3 and adjusted its expression to the professional blankness of something that had dealt with worse and survived. "Mr. Mikaelson," the goblin said, and the use of his name without introduction would have unsettled a lesser man. Klaus only raised an eyebrow. "Your account manager will be informed of your arrival." "Is there something specific?" "I'm here to see whatever it is I'm here to see," Klaus said, which was not helpful and he knew it, but honesty felt appropriate given that he didn't have a better answer. He pressed one hand flat against the marble counter and let the feeling in his chest orient itself. "I'm being pulled towards something in this building. I would like to find it." The goblin stared at him. Klaus waited. There was a quality to his stillness. 1,000 years of practice at being the most dangerous thing in any given room had given him a patience that wasn't really patience at all. It was the calm of something that didn't need to hurry because hurrying implied there was something you might fail to catch. Things didn't escape Klaus Mikaelson. They simply hadn't run yet. The goblin, to its credit, seemed to understand this on some fundamental level. It consulted a ledger, turned 2 pages, consulted the ledger again, and then said, with the careful neutrality of something defusing a situation it hadn't asked to be part of, "There is a matter, in Vault Corridor 7, that has come to our attention this morning. An irregularity. We were debating the appropriate course of action." "Take me there," Klaus said. The cart ride was brief and went deeper than Klaus expected, the tunnels narrowing and the torchlight thinning to something that would have been darkness to anyone else. Klaus watched the vault doors blur past and felt the pull intensify with every second of descent, sharpening from a compass pull to something almost painful, pressing against his sternum like a thumb. They stopped at a side corridor, the cart shuddering to a halt, and the goblin guide, a different one, older, with the particular wariness of something that had seen centuries of strange things and was currently revising its top 10 list, climbed out and led Klaus down a narrow passage to a vault door that was smaller than the main chambers, servant-sized, the kind used for secondary storage. The door was closed. Not locked, Klaus noticed. Just closed. From behind it came the quiet, unmistakable sound of a child breathing. Klaus moved the goblin aside, not roughly, but with a firmness that brooked no argument, and pushed the door open. The vault was small and dark and smelled of dust and old stone. There were a few storage boxes stacked against one wall, some trunks, what looked like the accumulated backup records of a mundane family who had perhaps inherited a vaguely magical object and opened an account to store it rather than deal with it. The kind of vault maintained out of vague family tradition by people who didn't really belong in this world and knew it. Sitting against the far wall, knees pulled to his chest, was a boy. He was small, smaller than he should have been for his age, which Klaus put at 7, maybe 8, with black hair that went in every direction and a pair of broken glasses held together at the bridge with what appeared to be a piece of sticky tape. He was wearing clothes that were too big for him by 3 sizes at least, a gray t-shirt that hung off one shoulder, jeans rolled up at the ankle 4 times to keep them from dragging. He had a bruise on his left forearm, faded yellow-green, a week old at least. He was reading. Or had been reading. He'd looked up when the door opened, tracking Klaus with the immediate, assessing stillness of a child who had learned young that the first second after a door opens tells you everything you need to know about what's coming through it. His eyes were very green. Even in the vault's dim light, they were startling, not the ordinary green hazel of most people who called their eyes green, but a true, deep color, vivid enough that Klaus registered them before he registered anything else. They were also, at present, doing something interesting. They were not afraid. Watchful, yes. Careful, certainly. But not afraid. The boy looked at Klaus the way old animals looked at new things, steady, cataloging, waiting for more information before committing to a response. Klaus stood in the doorway for a moment. Then, because he had made a study of reading rooms over 1,000 years and this particular room was telling him something very specific, he lowered himself to a crouch so he wasn't looming over the boy from the height of a standing adult, and he said, "How long have you been in here?" The boy considered this question with the seriousness of someone who had learned that questions were sometimes tests. "Since we arrived," he said. His voice was careful, measured, pitched to not carry. The voice of a child who had learned to take up as little acoustic space as possible. "They said to wait." "They?" "My aunt and uncle." The boy tilted his head slightly. "They're doing their banking. They said to stay here and not touch anything and not talk to anyone." "And yet here you are," Klaus said, "talking to someone." "You opened the door," the boy said, with a faint edge of the reasonable to it, as if this distinction mattered. And it did, Klaus realized. The boy hadn't broken the rule. The rule had been broken for him. He was noting the difference. This was not a normal 7-year-old. Klaus studied him for another moment. The clothes, the glasses, the bruise, the way he sat with his back against stone rather than taking the small crate that would have served as a more comfortable seat, as though he'd learned not to make himself too comfortable in spaces he hadn't been given. The complete absence of anything that belonged to him in this vault, no bag, no toy, no water, nothing. Left here like a box. Like something to be stored. The pull in Klaus's chest was enormous now, and he had finally, in these last 2 minutes, begun to understand what it was. He had sired vampires across 1,000 years. He had built bloodlines with the same deliberate care that other men built fortunes, not carelessly, not out of loneliness, but because a bloodline was a covenant, and Klaus understood covenants in a way that most beings never would. When he turned someone, a thread of his power passed into them, and through them to anyone they ever sired, and through those progeny to theirs, spreading outward through centuries like roots through stone, until the full weight of the Mikaelson line, the original line, the first and oldest, was distributed across 1,000 living vampires on 6 continents. That network of power had threads. Each thread ran back to him, and Klaus could feel them the way you could feel your own heartbeat, usually in the background, occasionally sharp if something tugged. Right now every single thread was pointing at this boy. Not toward him. At him. Into him. As if this child was the place where every line of Klaus's sired bloodline ultimately terminated. As if this boy was, by some mechanism Klaus didn't yet understand, the natural endpoint of 1,000 years of his power. Klaus sat very still with this realization for exactly 3 seconds. Then he said, "What's your name?" "Harry," the boy said. "Harry Potter." Klaus knew the name. You would have had to spend the last 6 years in a sensory deprivation chamber not to know the name, even outside the wizarding world, even among creatures like himself who moved in parallel to that community rather than within it. The death of Voldemort and the survival of his intended last victim had resonated. Old dark magic, suddenly extinguished. Even Klaus had felt it, though he hadn't known what it was at the time. He'd been in Prague in 1981, and on the night of October 31st he had felt something shift in the deep structure of things, some source of wrongness going quiet, and he had noted it and moved on. This was the boy at the center of that event. This was the child who had survived a killing curse that had never been survived before, apparently by means that no one in the wizarding world had adequately explained in 6 years of trying. Klaus looked at the bruise on Harry's arm and thought about what it meant that a child who had done all of that was sitting in a bank vault without water. "Harry," he said, keeping his voice easy, "how often do your aunt and uncle leave you somewhere while they do things?" Harry looked at the wall rather than at Klaus when he answered this one. "It's easier," he said, in the tone of someone repeating a justification they'd heard so many times it had worn grooves. "I ask too many questions." "Questions," Klaus said. "And things happen," Harry added, after a pause, with the specific flatness of someone reporting a fact they've been punished for. "When I get upset. Or when someone's being, I don't know, mean to me at school. Things happen and they can't explain it and it makes Uncle Vernon," he stopped. Started again. "It's easier if I'm not there." The casual articulation of this, the way he said it without self-pity, without dramatic weight, just laid it out like a weather report, was somehow worse than tears would have been. Klaus breathed in slowly. He had lived 1,000 years and experienced most of the varieties of human cruelty, and he was not easily moved by them anymore. Not because he didn't care, but because he had learned, at great cost, the difference between reacting and acting. He was very calm right now. The kind of calm that, in anyone who knew him well, would have been a significant warning sign. "I'm going to ask you something," Klaus said, "and I want you to think about it before you answer. Not because the answer is complicated, but because you deserve to be asked properly. All right?" Harry looked at him. The watchfulness had shifted into something harder to name, curiosity and caution in equal measure, with a thin thread of something that might have been hope running through the middle of it, pulled very tight, the way you held something you were afraid of breaking. "All right," Harry said. "How much of your life," Klaus said, "has been yours?" The silence stretched. Not the silence of someone who didn't understand the question. The silence of someone who understood it perfectly and was having to do a kind of accounting they had never done before, adding up all the mornings and meals and choices and moments, and measuring what fraction of them had actually belonged to them. "Not much," Harry said, finally, very quietly. Klaus nodded. He reached into his jacket pocket and drew out a small knife, bone-handled, very old, the kind of thing that other people kept in locked display cases and Klaus carried because it was useful, and held it flat on his palm so Harry could see it clearly and make no mistake about what was being offered. "I want to make you something," Klaus said. "An heir. Not to my money, though that comes with it," and it is considerable. Not to my name alone, though you'll have that too. I want to make you heir to every bloodline I have ever sired. Every vampire on this earth who owes their existence to my blood, they will owe you that same loyalty. Older than any debt you could earn, older than any title you could be given. It will make you something the wizarding world has never seen and something the vampire world has only seen once before, and it was me. Harry stared at him. He didn't look frightened, which was telling. He looked the way he'd looked since Klaus walked in, like he was cataloguing, measuring, waiting. Why? Harry said. It was the right question. It was absolutely the right question, and the fact that a 7-year-old thought to ask it first rather than asking what the knife was for or what a vampire bloodline was or how much money they were talking about, that told Klaus more than anything else had. Because you're already connected to it, Klaus said. I don't know how, and I won't pretend to. But I felt you from across an ocean, Harry. Every thread of power I have spent 1,000 years building runs through you in a way I can't explain. I am making it official because you deserve something official. Something no one can take away from you and lock in a vault. Harry looked at the knife. Looked at Klaus. Something moved through his face, slow, careful, the way ice moves when it begins to think about becoming water. You're not going to lie to me, he said. It wasn't quite a question. No, Klaus said. I have many faults. Lying to children I've claimed isn't one of them. What does it involve? Harry asked. The making me heir thing. A cut, Klaus said. Your palm, then mine. We press them together and I say words that are older than this building. It will hurt briefly. Then it will feel like, he paused, searching for the right comparison. Like standing in a room full of people who are all looking at you, but not the way you're used to. They'll be looking at you the way people look at something that matters. Harry stared at him for a very long time. Klaus waited. Okay, Harry said. It was the smallest, most unceremonious consent in the history of ancient blood rites, and somehow that made it exactly right. Klaus moved forward and knelt properly on the stone floor, and Harry uncurled from his position against the wall and held out his right hand with the steadiness of someone who had decided something and wasn't going to wobble about it. Klaus drew the blade across Harry's palm, quick, shallow, cleanly, and felt the sharp intake of Harry's breath but saw no flinch, saw only the eyes going very bright and very focused, and then Klaus drew the same line across his own palm without hesitation and pressed them together. He spoke in the old language. Not the language of spells or wand magic, something older than that, something that predated every magical tradition currently practiced in the world. The words weren't dramatic. They didn't echo. They pressed outward from his chest like a sound that wasn't quite sound, and the vault shuddered. And then every bloodline moved. Klaus felt it like a tide turning, all at once, every thread of his sired power redirecting, acknowledging, orienting. 1,000 vampires across 6 continents felt something shift in the root of what they were without knowing why. Elijah, sitting in their New Orleans compound 3,000 miles away, put down his book and went very still. Rebecca, in Paris, looked up from the window she'd been watching the rain through and felt something change in her blood. Harry made a sound, not a cry, something softer, surprised, and his magic answered. That was what none of them had expected. Not Klaus, not the goblin standing rigid in the vault doorway, not the stone of the bank itself. When the blood rite completed, Harry's magic, wild, untrained, enormous in the way of all children who hadn't yet learned to contain it, recognized what had come into it. And it responded. The lights in the vault blazed white. The stone under Klaus's knees cracked in a clean line outward from where they knelt, a spiderweb of hairline fractures spreading to the walls, and the boxes stacked against the far wall rattled and then flew backward, not violently but firmly, pushed away from Harry by a force that had no direction except outward, radiating from a 7-year-old boy who was looking at his own hand with an expression of complete and total astonishment. The feeling in Klaus's chest was gone. Not because the connection had severed. Because it had settled. It was no longer a pull. It was a foundation, solid and still, the way the ground under your feet wasn't something you felt until you stopped to think about it. "Well," Harry said, staring at the glowing faint lines on his palm where the cut was already closing, because that was what happened when you became heir to the oldest vampire bloodline in existence. The accelerated healing was one of the earliest gifts, not the transformation itself but the echo of it, a kindness of sorts. "Well," Harry said again, and he sounded almost entirely calm, "that was something." "Yes," Klaus agreed. He was looking at the cracked stone and the scattered boxes and the wild, uncontained flare of magic that had rocked a vault built to withstand dragon fire. He was thinking about what a fully trained wizard with that kind of innate power and 1,000 years of vampire bloodlines behind him would look like. He was, for perhaps the first time in a very long while, genuinely impressed. "What happens now?" Harry asked. "Now," Klaus said, standing and straightening his jacket with the calm of someone who hadn't just conducted an ancient blood rite in a bank vault, "we go and find your aunt and uncle." Harry stood. He pushed the broken glasses up his nose with one finger, a gesture so habitual it was clearly unconscious, and looked at Klaus with those very green, very steady eyes. "They're not going to like this," he said. "No," Klaus agreed pleasantly. "They're not." The Dursleys were on the main floor of the bank, in the process of concluding what appeared to be a deeply mundane transaction involving a small safety deposit account that contained, as far as the goblin teller was concerned, nothing of any particular interest. Vernon Dursley was a large man, wide rather than tall, with the particular solidity of someone who had always considered size to be a form of argument, wearing a suit that cost more than it was worth and carrying the expression of a man perpetually on the edge of being offended by something. Beside him stood a thin woman with a neck that would have been remarkable in a giraffe, her face arranged in the permanent pinch of someone who was never surprised by disappointment because they were constantly expecting it. They looked up when the goblin escort brought Klaus and Harry across the marble floor, and Klaus watched the precise sequence of emotions that crossed Vernon Dursley's face, first irritation at being interrupted, then confusion at who was doing the interrupting, then a second look at Klaus that produced something closer to unease, then a look at Harry that cycled rapidly through surprise and anger and, there, the thing Klaus had been watching for, the thing that settled the question finally. And completely. Guilt. Brief, immediately suppressed, immediately replaced by bluster, but there for just a moment in the flinch of the eyes, the tightening of the jaw. They knew exactly what they'd done and they knew it wasn't right and they'd done it anyway. "Who the devil are you?" Vernon Dursley said, in the voice of a man who felt that aggression was a preemptive defense. "Someone who found your nephew alone in a vault," Klaus said. "I'm curious what explanation you'd like to offer for that." He was perfectly fine, he was without water in a locked room for, Klaus glanced at Harry. 2 hours, Harry said, helpfully. 2 hours, Klaus continued, with a bruise on his arm that's approximately a week old, wearing clothes that I would not put on a scarecrow, with nothing to eat and no one to ask if anything went wrong. He kept his voice conversational. This was important. He had learned, over centuries, that the cold, reasonable voice was far more frightening than the raised one, because it said I am not angry. I have simply made a decision. I'm going to need you to explain to me why any of that is acceptable. Petunia Dursley had gone very white. Vernon had gone very red, which meant they'd met in the middle somewhere. "That is none of your business," Vernon said. "That is our family matter and I'll thank you to stay out of. He's mine now," Klaus said. Simple. No particular emphasis. Not a dramatic declaration. Just a fact, laid down on the marble floor of Gringotts like a document being filed. "I beg your pardon?" Vernon said. "He is my heir," Klaus said. "Formally, legally, and by a binding older than your country. He will not be returning with you today, or any day. I would strongly recommend against attempting to contest this. Not because I think you'd win, you wouldn't, but because I think the process of losing would be significantly unpleasant for you, and I am, when I choose to be, a generous person." Vernon's mouth opened. Closed. Opened again. He was doing the math of this man in front of him, the stillness, the quality of the voice, the fact that the goblin escort hadn't asked any questions and had positioned itself slightly to the side, the way things positioned themselves when they wanted to be adjacent to power but not in its line. "You can't just take a child," Petunia said, but her voice had gone thin and reedy, stripped of conviction. "There are laws." "Yes," Klaus said, "there are." He turned to the goblin escort. "Are there documents to be prepared?" "They are already being prepared," the goblin said, in the smooth tone of an institution that had decided to get ahead of events rather than be caught behind them. "The account transfer, the guardianship declaration, the bloodline acknowledgement, standard right documentation, fully witnessed by the bank. It will be on record with both Gringotts and the relevant magical authorities by end of business today." "Wonderful," Klaus said. He looked back at the Dursleys. He didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. He had lived long enough to know that the most final thing you could communicate to someone was the simple act of turning your attention away from them, because it said, more clearly than any threat, "You are no longer a factor in this equation." He looked at Harry instead. "Is there anything you want to collect from where you've been living?" Harry thought about this with the seriousness he brought to everything. "My blanket," he said, after a moment. "And a book." "The blanket's mine. The book I borrowed from school but I haven't finished it." "We'll get you new blankets," Klaus said, "and every book you want. But we'll collect those as well." "And my letters," Harry added, quieter. "There are letters from my parents. Just 2 of them. They're hidden under a loose board in my room." Klaus was silent for a moment. "We will get those," he said, and there was something in his voice that Harry seemed to hear, because the careful steadiness of his face broke slightly, not into tears, but into something more complicated than that, some expression at the hinge of being known. He pushed his glasses up his nose again. "Okay," he said. They walked out of Gringotts into the London afternoon, Klaus and Harry side by side, and behind them the doors swung closed on the Dursleys' silence. The city was going about its business around them, cabs and pigeons and the smell of food from somewhere nearby, and Harry stopped on the bottom step and looked at the street with the expression of someone recalibrating. "You're a vampire," Harry said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Klaus said. "The oldest one?" "One of them," Klaus said. "I have siblings. You'll meet them." Harry absorbed this with the equanimity of someone whose frame of reference for normal had always been broad enough to accommodate most things. "Are you going to bite me?" "No," Klaus said, and felt oddly amused by the directness. "You're my heir, not my dinner." "Good distinction," Harry said seriously. Klaus looked at him, this small, underfed, unafraid child with his taped glasses and his dead parents' letters hidden under a floorboard, and felt the settled weight in his chest that was 1,000 bloodlines resting in this boy, waiting. "I have rules," Klaus said. "Not many, but the ones I have are firm. You will not lie to me. You will not hide what you are capable of to make other people comfortable. And you will not," he paused, finding the right words for something he felt very precisely. "You will not apologize for existing. Not to anyone. Is that understood?" Harry looked up at him. That green gaze, steady and old and 7 years old all at once. "You'll have to teach me that last one," Harry said quietly. "I don't know how yet." "I know," Klaus said. "That's why I'm here." They walked down the street together, the original hybrid and the boy who lived, and the ordinary London afternoon carried on around them, entirely unaware that it had just become slightly less ordinary than it had been before. In a vault corridor deep beneath the bank, the hairline cracks Harry's magic had made in the stone stayed open. The goblins looked at them, consulted each other, and ultimately decided to leave them. They had stood for worse things and they would stand for these. 3,000 miles away, in New Orleans, Elijah Mikaelson sat with his book closed in his lap and thought about what he had felt shift in the bloodlines, turning like a compass needle, pointing somewhere new. He picked up his phone and called Rebecca. She answered on the second ring. You felt it too, she said, without preamble. I did, Elijah said. What did he do? I don't know yet, Elijah said, but I imagine we'll be going to London. There was a pause on the line. Is he all right? Rebecca asked, and her voice had that quality it got sometimes, the careful casualness of someone asking about something they were already more invested in than they'd intended to be. I believe so, Elijah said. I believe he found whatever he was looking for. And whatever he was looking for, Rebecca said slowly, found him back. Yes, Elijah said. That is precisely what I'm afraid of. And also, he added, after a beat, I think, what I'm glad of. He ended the call and looked at the ceiling of the compound for a long moment, and then he began making arrangements for London. Chapter 2, 1,000 Years of Kin. The house was in Kensington. Not obviously, from the outside, it sat between two other townhouses on a quiet street where the trees had grown tall enough to lean toward each other overhead, and if you walked past it without knowing, you'd see a black door with brass fittings and a window box going slightly wild with lavender and think nothing of it. But if you were invited in, if you crossed the threshold and the compulsion that Klaus had woven into the walls 3 years ago recognized you and stepped aside, you walked into something else entirely. High ceilings and dark wood and the accumulated weight of a family that had been furnishing homes for a very long time, not cluttered, never cluttered, Elijah had opinions about that, but layered in a way that spoke of centuries of choices, this painting kept, this chair reupholstered for the 4th time because it was the right shape, this rug carried from a house in Prague that no longer existed. Harry stood in the front hallway and looked at all of it without saying anything. Klaus watched him do it. He'd noticed in the car from the bank that Harry processed new environments with the same systematic quiet he seemed to bring to everything, not overwhelmed, just thorough, running his eyes over a room the way you read a document you might be tested on later. He didn't ask questions until he'd finished looking. It's very clean, Harry said finally, which was not what Klaus had expected. Elijah has opinions, Klaus said. Who's Elijah? My brother. Klaus set his keys on the hall table. He'll be here by tomorrow. There's also a sister. Rebecca. She'll arrive whenever she decides to, which could be tomorrow or could be next week, there's no predicting her on timelines. Harry absorbed this. Do they know about me? They know something happened, Klaus said. They don't know the details yet. Come in properly, you're letting the light in. Harry stepped fully inside and the door swung closed behind him, and Klaus watched his shoulders do something slight and involuntary, a fractional drop, as if some interior tension had let go just enough to notice. The house was warm. Klaus didn't need warmth, but he kept it warm because he'd lived long enough to know that coldness was a choice you could simply decline to make. He took Harry upstairs to a bedroom on the 2nd floor, facing the garden, good light in the mornings, the kind of room that asked nothing of you except that you sleep in it, and watched Harry stand in the center of it for a long moment, both hands at his sides. This is yours, Klaus said. You can change it however you like. There is nothing in this house that you're not allowed to touch, and no room where you're not allowed to be. The door locks from the inside. Harry turned and looked at him. Why did you say that? The door thing? Because it seemed like relevant information, Klaus said. Something moved through Harry's face that Klaus filed away and didn't comment on. Instead he crossed to the bed and pulled back the duvet, dark blue, thick, the kind that wrapped rather than covered, and said, You'll sleep here tonight. Tomorrow we'll go to your aunt and uncle's house and collect your things. The neighbors will talk, Harry said immediately. Klaus looked at him. To Uncle Vernon, Harry clarified, matter of fact. If you show up in a car like that and come to the door. He cares about what the neighbors think. He'll be difficult about it. The car in question was a black Mercedes that ran quieter than most cars had any right to, and Klaus supposed he could see why that might be a concern in a Surrey suburb. I'll manage your uncle, he said. He's very loud when he's upset, Harry said, in the tone of someone offering a fair warning. And he goes very red. Harry, Klaus said, I have had dinner with Napoleon Bonaparte. I have survived Elijah in a bad mood, which is a thing I would not wish on most enemies. I have had a disagreement with a Roman emperor that lasted 11 years. He held Harry's gaze. I will manage your uncle. Harry appeared to consider this resume. Okay, he said, and there was a small thing at the corner of his mouth that wasn't quite a smile but was reaching for the general shape of one. There are books on the shelf, Klaus added, nodding toward the built-in shelving along one wall, which held an eclectic mix of things Elijah had deemed suitable for a house where guests occasionally stayed. Bathroom is the first door on the left. If you're hungry, the kitchen is on the ground floor, back of the house. Help yourself to whatever you find. I'll be in my study if you need anything. He was at the door when Harry said, Mr. Mikaelson. Klaus stopped. Klaus, he corrected, without turning. A pause. Klaus. Harry seemed to try the name out, testing the fit of it. Why does it feel different? Since the vault. I can feel something. It's like, he stopped, searching. It's like hearing a sound just below what you can actually hear. Like knowing there are people in the next room even when they're quiet. Klaus turned then, because this was important. That's the bloodlines, he said. You'll learn to read them. They're not voices, not exactly, but they have a quality. A weight. Right now they're getting used to you and you're getting used to them. It'll settle. There are a lot of them, Harry said. Yes, Klaus said. There are. They're not, Harry frowned. They're not afraid of me. No, Klaus said. They're not. He considered what to say next, and decided on honesty because honesty was what he'd promised. Some of them are testing you. Feeling the edges of what you are. That's normal. Let them. You won't find anything to worry about. Harry nodded slowly, and Klaus left him to it. He went downstairs to his study, poured 2 fingers of bourbon he didn't particularly want, and sat in the chair by the window where he could see the garden going blue in the evening light. He turned his phone over in his hand twice and then called Elijah. I've done something, he said, when Elijah picked up. I gathered, Elijah said. His voice was careful in the specific way it got careful when he was reserving judgment, not withholding it, just holding it at arm's length until he had more information. Tell me. Harry Potter, Klaus said, and let the name sit. The silence on the other end was thoughtful. The child, Elijah said. The one from 1981. He's 7. He was locked in a vault at Gringotts while his aunt and uncle did their banking. Klaus looked at his glass. He had a bruise on his arm and clothes 3 sizes too large and 2 letters from his dead parents hidden under a floorboard at their house, which he asked if he could go back for. Not the clothes, not anything else. The letters. Elijah was quiet for a moment. And the pull you felt? Every bloodline I've ever sired runs through him, Klaus said. I don't know how. I don't know the mechanism. But the rite confirmed it. It wasn't reaching, Elijah, it settled. Like water finding its level. You performed the Heir rite, Elijah said. Not quite a question, not quite an accusation. The flat register of someone processing something significant. Yes. Another silence, longer. Klaus waited him out. He'll be the focal point for every vampire on Earth who carries your blood, Elijah said. Every enemy you've made, every power struggle you've been part of, every vampire lord who has ever resented the Mikaelson line, they'll know. They'll come. Yes, Klaus said again. And you thought this was appropriate to do to a 7-year-old? I thought, Klaus said, with the specific precision of someone making a distinction that matters, that it was appropriate to do for a 7-year-old. There's a difference. He's already connected to it, Elijah. I made it official. I gave it teeth. No one can take it away from him now by claiming it was informal or accidental or unwitnessed. He has the bank's documentation and the blood itself and 1,000 lineages that will answer to him by right. He paused. I made him unkillable by paperwork. That seemed like the least I could do. A very long pause. I'll be there by morning, Elijah said, in a tone that meant the argument would continue in person and would probably involve coffee and a great deal of careful articulation of concerns, which was the Elijah method, and which Klaus had been navigating for 1,000 years. He's well. He's reading in his bedroom and eating his way through whatever he found in the kitchen, Klaus said. He'd heard the sounds, the quiet padding of small feet, the careful opening and closing of the refrigerator, the particular silence of someone eating standing up because they hadn't decided yet if they were allowed to sit down. Klaus paused. He's extraordinary, Elijah. I don't say that easily. I know you don't, Elijah said, and his voice had shifted slightly, warming at an edge that Klaus noted and appreciated. I'll see you in the morning. He called Rebecca next. She picked up on the first ring, which meant she'd been waiting for it. Tell me everything, she said. Klaus told her. The silence after he finished had a different quality than Elijah's silences. Where Elijah went quiet to process and organize, Rebecca went quiet because something had hit her somewhere soft and she was managing the impact. He asked if he could go back for his parents' letters, she said. Yes. Not anything else. No. Right, Rebecca said, very firmly, in the voice she used when she had made a decision and was already several steps into its execution. I'll be there tomorrow. Don't let him be alone too much, kids who've been, she stopped. Just don't leave him alone too much, Nick. I'm not leaving him alone, Klaus said. You absolutely will, Rebecca said, with the accuracy of a sister, because you're going to sit in your study and brood about whether you've done the right thing and tell yourself you're giving him space, and meanwhile he'll be upstairs talking himself out of asking for things. Don't do that. Go and sit with him. Klaus looked at the ceiling. Good night, Rebecca. Go and sit with him, she said, and hung up. He went and sat with him. He brought a book and a glass of water for Harry, who had migrated from the bedroom to the top of the stairs and was sitting there reading with the careful posture of someone who had never had permission to occupy a landing, and who was occupying it very quietly just to see if the rule existed. Kitchen has a table, Klaus said, settling on the step below him. I know, Harry said. He didn't move. After a moment, this is better. I can see the whole house from here. Klaus leaned against the banister and let him have the landing and the sight lines, because the instinct to see the whole room was one he understood better than most. They sat like that for an hour, not talking much, the house settling around them into the particular quiet of a place that has recently been asked to contain something new. Elijah arrived at 7 in the morning looking, as he always did, like he had stepped out of a painting that aspired to be a photograph. Dark suit, white shirt, the tie that meant he was in diplomatic mode. He stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at Harry, who was sitting at the table with a bowl of cereal, and Harry looked back at him with those green eyes doing their measuring thing. You must be Elijah, Harry said. I am, Elijah said. He came in, set his bag down, and poured himself coffee with the ease of a man in a house he'd furnished. He sat across from Harry and put his hands around his cup and looked at him with the same directness Harry was directing at him, the two of them apparently doing some kind of mutual assessment. I'm told you were found in a vault. Yes, Harry said. And you agreed to the blood right. Yes. Within an hour of meeting my brother. He made a reasonable case, Harry said. Elijah looked at Klaus, who was standing by the window with his own coffee and the expression of a man who was letting events unfold. He's 7, Elijah said. Almost 8, Harry said, with the particular investment of someone for whom the difference mattered. Almost 8, Elijah amended, and something in his expression shifted, not softened, exactly, but adjusted, the way you adjusted a frame to better fit what it was holding. You'll have questions. A lot of them, Harry confirmed. I've been saving them up. Good, Elijah said. Ask them. I will answer what I can and tell you honestly when I cannot. And Harry asked. He asked for 45 minutes straight, with the organized efficiency of someone who had been thinking through categories of questions since last night and was now working through them systematically. He asked about the bloodlines and how they worked and what it meant that they answered to him. He asked about the vampire world and how it was structured, which led Elijah into a careful 15-minute explanation of bloodline hierarchies and the old covenants that Klaus had established in the early centuries. He asked about his own magic and whether it was connected to what had happened in the vault, and Elijah told him, carefully, that they didn't know yet but they thought yes. He asked about his parents, not emotionally, but directly, in the tone of someone who had decided they wanted information rather than comfort, and Elijah told him what was known, and didn't soften it unnecessarily. Harry listened to all of it without interrupting, and when Elijah finished he sat with his empty cereal bowl and processed for a moment and then said, "Voldemort isn't really gone, is he?" Klaus looked at Elijah. Elijah looked at Klaus. "No," Klaus said. "He isn't." "Because I can feel something," Harry said, matter of fact. "Not clearly. Like something pulling in the wrong direction. It's faint but it's there." He touched the scar on his forehead, not dramatically, just acknowledging it. "I think it's here." "Yes," Klaus said, "we think it might be." "Okay," Harry said. He picked up his spoon and put it in the empty bowl. "Then we should probably deal with that eventually." "Eventually," Klaus agreed. "You're 7. You don't have to solve it today." "Almost 8, Harry said again, and this time the corner of his mouth definitely did the thing that was almost a smile. They drove to Surrey that afternoon. Harry had been right about the neighbors. The street was the kind of street where people moved lace curtains at the sound of an engine, and the Mercedes drew 3 curtain movements on the approach to number 4 alone. Klaus parked in front of the house and got out and walked to the door and rang the bell with the specific calm of a man who was not anticipating any difficulty because difficulty had not been given permission to occur. Vernon Dursley answered the door with the expression of a man who had been rehearsing outrage and found, on delivery, that it didn't quite land. Klaus had this effect on people. Something about the way he stood, not threatening, not aggressive, simply absolutely certain, made rehearsed positions feel silly. "I'm here for Harry's things," Klaus said. "He'll show me where they are. This won't take long." "Now you listen here," Vernon started, and Klaus stepped past him into the house with the easy authority of someone who had walked through harder doors than this, and Harry, who had been standing slightly behind Klaus on the front path, followed him in with the particular straightness of someone who had just discovered that walking into a house they'd lived in for years could feel completely different depending on who was beside you. They went upstairs. Harry's room, Dudley's second bedroom, technically, the sign of which was a second dresser shoved against the wall and the residue of a child's territorial expansion visible in the furniture arrangement, had a small bed and a shelf with 3 books and very little else. Harry went directly to the loose board in the corner of the room and lifted it and extracted a small, folded, weathered envelope that he handled with both hands. Klaus looked at the room. He looked at the small bed, the bare shelf, the absence of anything personalized, anything that said a child had chosen it. He noted the lock on the outside of the door, a bolt, installed facing outward, into the hallway, so that the door could be locked from outside. He didn't say anything. He let Harry collect his blanket and his borrowed school book, and then he picked up the 3 books from the shelf and added them to the small pile, because they were Harry's whether or not they'd been given in good faith. "That's everything?" Klaus asked. Harry looked at the room. "Yes," he said. Something in his voice was very flat, the way voices went flat when they were choosing not to feel something until a better time. "There wasn't much." "There will be," Klaus said simply, and that was all that needed saying. They went downstairs. Vernon was in the hallway, large and red and working up to something. Petunia was visible in the kitchen doorway, arms crossed, her face doing something complicated that was either guilt or resentment or both in a proportion that would have required a chemist to separate. Klaus looked at Vernon. "The bolt on the outside of that door," he said. Vernon opened his mouth. "If I hear that it has been used on any other child," Klaus said, his voice staying absolutely level, "I'll come back. Not to talk." He held Vernon's gaze for 3 full seconds, long enough for the man to feel the depth of what was behind those eyes, the weight of 1,000 years looking through them, and then he turned to the door without waiting for a response, because responding would have implied there was more to discuss. Harry was beside him on the front path. He looked up at Klaus with an expression that was measuring something new, not the man, but this specific quality of him, this way of handling things without drama or delay, just clean resolution. "He looked scared," Harry said, as they reached the car. "Yes," Klaus said. "Of you?" "Of the idea," Klaus said, "that someone was paying attention. Men like your uncle are only comfortable when they believe no one is watching." He opened the car door. "They're very easy to unsettle, actually." Harry got in. He held the envelope in his lap for the drive back, both hands over it, not quite pressed to his chest but close. Klaus didn't comment on it. He drove and let the quiet be quiet. Rebecca arrived at 6 that evening in a way that could only be described as an entrance, despite the fact that she simply came through the front door. She was wearing a red jacket over a white dress and carrying 2 bags and a bottle of wine, and the moment the door opened she assessed the hallway in one sweep, found Klaus, pointed at him in a gesture that conveyed several things simultaneously, and then turned and found Harry. She crouched down in front of him immediately, not the way adults crouched to be patronizing but the way people crouched when they wanted to actually be at eye level, and looked at him with blue eyes that were direct and warm and absolutely undisguised. "Hi," she said. "I'm Rebecca. I'm going to be extremely annoying about making sure you eat enough and you're going to pretend to find it irritating but secretly it'll be fine. Do you have a favorite food?" Harry blinked. "I don't, I'm not sure. I haven't had very many." Something flashed through Rebecca's face that was there and gone in an instant, controlled but not quite fast enough. "Right," she said, in the same decisive tone she'd used on the phone. "Then that's first. Come on." She straightened, picked up one of her bags, and headed toward the kitchen. "I brought things. Klaus can't cook." "I can cook," Klaus said. "You can technically produce food," Rebecca said over her shoulder, "which is not the same thing." Harry looked at Klaus. Klaus gave a small, conceding tilt of his head. Harry's face did the almost smile thing, and then, following Rebecca into the kitchen, it became an actual smile, small and careful, like something that wasn't sure of its welcome, but real. Klaus watched it happen and felt the settled weight in his chest shift fractionally, not disturbed, just rearranging itself around a new constant. Elijah came out of the study and stood beside Klaus in the hallway, and they listened to Rebecca explaining to Harry the difference between pasta that had been made correctly and pasta that Klaus had made, and Harry asking a question in that careful, interested voice, and Rebecca answering it at length. "He's very calm," Elijah said quietly. "He's been managing things alone for a long time," Klaus said. "He's good at it. We just need to make sure he knows he doesn't have to." Elijah nodded slowly. "And the bloodlines?" "Settled. Quiet." Klaus paused. "Waiting." Elijah looked at the kitchen doorway, where the light was warm and there was the sound of someone being taught something new, and the slightly awkward pause of someone who was learning to accept help. "There will be a response," he said. "When the vampire world understands what you've done. When they feel it." "I know," Klaus said. "Some of the older bloodlines will send representatives to test the claim," Elijah said. "They'll want to see him." "Let them come," Klaus said, and his voice had the quality of something that had already decided how that meeting would go. It happened on the 4th night. Klaus had been expecting it to take longer, which was either a mark of the strength of the bloodline connection, Harry was broadcasting something the vampire world could feel at range, or a mark of how closely the older lineage lords had been watching the Mikaelson family. Probably both. Harry was in his room, having taken to going there after dinner not with the defeated quality of someone being sent away but with the particular purposefulness of a child who had discovered that having a room of his own was an experience that bore investigating at length. He'd rearranged the books twice. He'd moved the small desk to face the window. Small negotiations with space that Klaus recognized as someone learning what it felt like to have preferences. The vampire who arrived at the front door at 11 at night was old, not Mikaelson old, but old enough to have the particular composure that came with centuries, and old enough to have been a bloodline lord in his own right for longer than most nations had existed. His name was Aldrich Voss, and he was, by the hierarchy of the vampire world, the most powerful of the 12 lineage lords whose lines ran from Klaus's own turnings. He was tall and angular with the specific quality of preserved age, not old-looking, but ancient-feeling, the way rooms in very old buildings felt, and he came to the door with 2 attendants and no particular pretense of social courtesy. Elijah received him, because Elijah was always the door through which difficult things entered, but Klaus was in the sitting room when they came in, standing by the fireplace with a glass of something dark, and he watched Voss take the room with his eyes and do the calculation. Mikaelson, Voss said. Voss, Klaus said. You moved quickly. When the blood itself moves, one moves quickly, Voss said. He was looking at Klaus with the expression of a man who had rehearsed neutrality and was currently choosing it deliberately, which was more interesting than actual neutrality would have been. You've performed the Heir right. I have. On a child. On the Heir, Klaus said, with a pleasant emphasis on the second word that moved the conversation very cleanly off the territory Voss had been trying to establish. Voss was quiet for a moment. The lineage lords will want an audience, he said. To verify the claim. To acknowledge, to test, Klaus said, stripping the diplomacy out of it cleanly. You want to see if he can hold the position. If the right held properly. If I've done something rash. He tilted his head. Which is understandable. And I'm inclined to allow it, because Harry can hold it and the right held completely and you'll all be better served by knowing that sooner rather than later. And if he can't? Voss said. Hold it. He can, Klaus said. With respect, Voss began. He can, Klaus said again, no harder, no louder, just twice as final, and left it at that. It was Elijah who said, gently, perhaps the Lord would like to meet him. Voss looked at the ceiling briefly, the expression of a man recalculating. Then he nodded. Elijah went upstairs. Klaus heard the quiet knock, the pause, the door, the low sound of conversation. He watched Voss do the thing old vampires did in new situations, go very still and wait, conserving energy, making no unnecessary movement. His 2 attendants stood at the room's edges, blending, watching. Harry came downstairs in his pajamas. He was wearing blue pajamas with small yellow stars on them that Rebecca had bought the day before, and he'd clearly been reading because the broken glasses were pushed up crooked on his nose, and he looked thoroughly, completely 7 years old, and he walked into that sitting room with Elijah at his shoulder and looked at Voss the way he'd looked at Klaus in the vault, steady, measuring, patient. Voss looked at him. Harry waited for him to finish looking. You're one of them, Harry said, after a moment. I can feel you. He tilted his head slightly, the way he did when he was sorting information. You came from Klaus originally. But it's been a long time. You're further out. Like a branch. Voss went very still. You can feel lineage, he said. I've been learning to read it, Harry said, as if this were a perfectly straightforward process. It's like, everyone feels slightly different. Like hearing different instruments. You're the same bass sound as Klaus but older in some way. A different pitch. You've been able to do this for 4 days, Voss said, and there was something in his voice that had completely abandoned the diplomatic register. Something that was genuinely, unguardedly startled. Is that unusual? Harry asked, looking at Klaus. Somewhat, Klaus said, with considerable understatement. Right, Harry said, apparently filing this away. He looked back at Voss. You came to see if the claim held. Yes, Voss said, dropping the pretense entirely. It holds, Harry said. I know it holds because I can feel all of it. It's constant. Like a sound that's always there. He pushed his glasses straight. I don't know all of what it means yet. I'm working on it. But if you need to know whether it held, it held. Voss looked at him for a long moment. Then he did something that Klaus had not seen him do in 200 years of acquaintance. He inclined his head. Not deeply, not a bow, not submission, but the specific slight angle of genuine acknowledgement between equals. My lord, Voss said, and addressed it to Harry. Harry blinked. He glanced at Klaus, quick and questioning. That's the right response, Klaus said, if you're satisfied with the claim. I am, Voss said. Thoroughly. He was looking at Harry with the expression of someone revising several assumptions at speed. The lineage lords will want the formal acknowledgement. I'll arrange it. Give us a week, Elijah said. He's adjusting. Of course, Voss said, and he meant it, which was more than Klaus had expected. When Voss and his attendants left, Harry stood in the sitting room for a moment, processing. Then he sat down on the sofa and pulled his feet up and sat with his knees to his chest, the pajamas with the stars on them, the slightly crooked glasses, the very quiet face. He was actually surprised, Harry said. I could not feel it, exactly. But I could see it. Yes, Elijah said, settling into the chair across from him. He was. Why does that matter? That he was surprised? Because surprised people are honest people, Klaus said, sitting at the other end of the sofa. They haven't had time to decide what they want you to think. He looked at Harry. You read him well. I read everyone, Harry said, and there was something briefly bare in the way he said it, not proud, not casual, but the plain statement of someone who had spent years developing a skill they'd needed in order to survive. Knowing how adults were feeling before they acted on it. Reading the room. Being ready. Klaus looked at him. You don't need to do that here, he said. Harry looked back. I know, he said quietly. I'm practicing not doing it. It's harder than doing it. It is, Klaus agreed. It gets easier. Did it for you? Klaus was quiet for a moment. Not entirely, he said honestly. But enough. Harry nodded. He uncurled slightly, just a fraction, and picked up the book he'd brought down with him and opened it in his lap, and they sat there, Klaus, Elijah, Harry, in the warm light of the sitting room, with the bloodline settling quietly around them like something finding its correct shape after a long time of being wrong. Rebecca came in from wherever she'd been, the kitchen again, the sound suggesting she'd been reorganizing it according to principles she hadn't shared with anyone, and stopped in the doorway, took in the tableau, and said nothing. She came and sat on the arm of the sofa, looked over Harry's shoulder at what he was reading, and said, that one's actually good. You'll like the second half. How does it end? Harry asked. They find what they were looking for, Rebecca said, but it costs something. Does it cost too much? No, she said. It's the kind of cost that turns out to be worth it. Harry nodded, satisfied, and turned a page. Klaus looked at Elijah. Elijah looked at Klaus, and in the complex, thousand-year vocabulary of brothers there was, in that look, something that neither of them would have said aloud because they'd learned that the things you said aloud became fragile in a way that the things you simply knew together did not. This was the beginning of something. It already mattered. They would not break it. Outside, London went on in its ordinary nighttime way, and in the sitting room of a Kensington townhouse, an almost 8-year-old boy read a book between an original vampire and her brother, and the thousand bloodlines that now acknowledged him breathed quietly, content, waiting for the world to come and try to take what was theirs. It would come. They all knew it would come. But not tonight. Chapter 3, The Letter and the Wand. The Hogwarts letter arrived on a Thursday. Harry found it on the kitchen table when he came down for breakfast, sitting between the fruit bowl and Elijah's newspaper with the kind of casual placement that suggested someone had put it there deliberately rather than left it accidentally. It was heavier than a normal letter, the envelope made of thick parchment the color of old cream, addressed in emerald green ink in handwriting that looped with a formality that felt like it had opinions about itself. Mr. H. Potter, the second bedroom, 4 Kensington Townhouse, London. Harry picked it up and turned it over. A wax seal on the back, purple, stamped with a crest, a lion, a snake, an eagle, and a badger arranged around a large letter H. He broke the seal and read it standing up, which was still a habit he was working on undoing, the standing to do things posture of someone who hadn't expected to be allowed to sit. Klaus was in the doorway watching him when he looked up. "I've been invited to a school," Harry said. "Yes," Klaus said. "You knew it was coming." "I knew it would come eventually. I didn't know today was the day." He came in and poured coffee and looked at the letter over Harry's shoulder. "What do you think?" Harry looked at the letter again. He thought about it the way he thought about most things, not rushing to the obvious reaction, turning it over to find what was underneath. "I think I want to go," he said. "I think there are things I need to learn that you can't teach me. Not because you don't know them," a brief, careful glance up. "But because they're about what I am in the wizarding world. I need to understand that from the inside." Klaus sat down across from him. "And what do you think you are in the wizarding world?" "The boy who survived something," Harry said, with a flatness that wasn't dismissal but was a long way from the reverence the wizarding world had been applying to that event for 6 years. "Which means everyone has a version of me already built. They'll have been deciding what I am since I was a year old." He set the letter down. "I'd rather they met me first before the version they built gets too solid." Klaus looked at him for a moment. 4 weeks of this. 4 weeks of this child at the kitchen table making observations that most adults didn't get to until they'd been disappointed by the world several times. "Elijah," Klaus called. Elijah appeared in the doorway with the expression of someone who had been pretending not to listen. "Diagon Alley," he said. "Today, I think. Best to get ahead of the back-to-school rush." "I want to come," Rebecca said, from somewhere upstairs. "You're always invited," Elijah said. "I know, I just wanted to say it before Klaus decided it was a tactical operation." "It's not a tactical operation," Klaus said. "You're already planning the route," Rebecca said. He was, a little. They went to Diagon Alley at 11, arriving via the leaky cauldron in the way that people arrived in Diagon Alley when they knew what they were doing, straight to the bar, a word with Tom, through the back, 3 taps on the right bricks. The wall opened onto the alley in its particular way, folding back like a stage reveal, and Harry stepped through and stopped. He'd been prepared for it. Elijah had briefed him the night before with the thoroughness he brought to all preparation, the shops, the approximate layout, the social geography of the place. Harry had listened and asked good questions and still, stepping into it for the first time, he stopped. Because no briefing really prepared you for the smell of it, the mix of parchment and potion ingredients and the particular sharp sweetness of magical confectionery, and underneath all of it something older that you felt rather than smelled, the ambient buzz of concentrated magic wearing the shape of an ordinary street. The buildings leaned toward each other at the tops, centuries old and comfortable with it, their signs swinging in a wind that seemed to originate from somewhere internal to the alley itself. Harry stood in it for exactly 4 seconds, and then he straightened his glasses and said, "Okay. Wand first. The letter says the wand is most important." "List maker," Rebecca said approvingly, appearing beside him. "There's a sensible order," Harry said. "There is," she agreed. "Let's go find it." They moved through the alley as a group, which was its own kind of statement. Klaus drew attention the way he always drew attention, not dramatically, but the way something draws attention when it doesn't belong to the ambient category of things in a space. He was too still, too certain, and he wasn't paying attention to the things wizarding people generally paid attention to. Rebecca was beautiful in the specific way that tended to make people forget what they'd been doing. Elijah projected an authority so refined it had become invisible, which paradoxically made him more noticeable rather than less. People looked. Harry noticed them looking, catalogued it, filed it away. Then a woman at the apothecary door pointed at him, not rudely, just reflexively, and said something to the man beside her, and the man looked, and they both had the same expression. Recognition. Not of Klaus, not of Elijah or Rebecca. Recognition of the scar above Harry's glasses. By the time they reached Ollivander's, the alley had noticed. Not dramatically. Not the way Harry would come to understand it did when he wanted to avoid it. Quietly, like a current shifting, a few heads turned, a few voices dropping, a few people doing that thing where they pretended to look at a shop window while actually looking at the reflection in it. A small girl about Harry's age stared at him openly until her mother steered her away, and the girl looked over her shoulder as she went with enormous eyes. Harry walked through all of it with his shoulders level and his chin up, and if he noticed, which he absolutely did, he didn't react, and that alone was different from what most people would have done. Ollivander's was dim and smelled of sawdust and something underneath it that pressed on the senses like a submerged word, the specific sensation of potential not yet committed to direction. Thousands of thin boxes stacked floor to ceiling on shelves that disappeared into shadows that were deeper than the architecture warranted, and behind the counter a man who appeared to have been assembled from the same materials as the shop, pale and precise, with eyes the color of a full moon and the manner of something that lived inside its own expertise so completely that the outside world had become mainly theoretical. Ollivander came around the counter when they entered and stopped. He looked at Harry. He looked at Klaus. He looked at Harry again, and this time the moon-colored eyes sharpened in a way that had nothing to do with salesmanship. "Mr. Potter," he said, and the way he said it was different from the way people in the alley had reacted, less reverence, more something that resembled the specific interest of a craftsman who had just been presented with an unusual problem. "Hello," Harry said. Ollivander moved around him slowly, looking in a way that was intrusive and professional and clearly meant to gather information rather than unsettle. "Your father, James Potter, mahogany, 11 inches, pliable, excellent for transfiguration. Your mother," he paused for a fraction of a second, just enough to notice. "Willow, 10 1/4, swishy. Charming for charm work." He stopped in front of Harry and looked at him directly. "And you? Let's see what wants you." "That's an odd way to put it," Harry said. "It's the accurate way," Ollivander said, not unkindly. "The wand chooses, Mr. Potter. I merely arrange introductions." He picked up a measuring tape from the counter. "Hold out your arm." The measuring tape began its work autonomously, running up and down Harry's arm with professional efficiency, noting the length from shoulder to finger, from wrist to elbow, the width of the hand, seemingly measuring things that had no obvious relevance to a stick of wood. Ollivander moved through his shelves, pulling boxes with the casual certainty of someone who spoke this library fluently. He tried 9 wands. Harry picked up the first 7 and each one did nothing, not the anticipated underwhelming response of a wand that didn't fit, but truly nothing, as if the wand was in the presence of something so outside its experience that it simply had no language for the situation. The 8th produced a brief gust of wind that knocked several boxes from a nearby shelf, which Ollivander assessed with a slight frown and replaced. The 9th sparked, once, and went dark. Ollivander had stopped looking professionally interested and started looking genuinely uncertain, which was a quality he wore with the discomfort of a man unaccustomed to it. He disappeared into the back of the shop. Klaus, who had been standing near the window in the specific stillness of something that was paying close attention without appearing to, exchanged a glance with Elijah. Harry sat on the small stool Ollivander had indicated and waited with his hands in his lap. "Is this normal?" Rebecca asked, quietly, from near the door. "No," Elijah said. Ollivander came back carrying a box that was different from the others, older, the wood of the case darker with age, the brass fittings at the corners green with verdigris. He held it differently, too, with the specific care of something you didn't bring out often. "Holly," he said, setting the box on the counter and opening it with deliberate hands, 11 inches, phoenix feather. He paused, his fingers resting on the lid. "I've been waiting to see what happened with this one. The phoenix that gave the feather gave only one other. The wand that shares its core, the one that did the thing you survived." Harry looked at the wand in the case. He didn't reach for it immediately. "They'll know each other," Harry said. "Yes," Ollivander said. "Is that a problem?" "I don't know," Ollivander said, and the honesty of it was striking enough that Klaus moved fractionally forward from the window. "In theory, brother wands have a connection that complicates things. But in practice," he looked at Harry with those pale eyes. "You are not a theoretical situation, Mr. Potter. I don't think the usual rules will apply." Harry picked up the wand. The shop went white. Not the brief spark of a good match or the warm glow of a strong affinity. White, clean and total, pouring from the wand in Harry's hand outward to every corner of the room, washing the shadows from the shelves and flooding through the windows into the alley outside where several people stopped and looked at the shop with the expression of people who had just felt something large pass them at close range. The bloodlines moved. Klaus felt them all at once, a vast, coordinated stirring, the way a flock of birds moved when something startled the nearest member, the motion running outward from the center faster than thought. Every vampire on Earth who carried Mikaelson blood felt something shift in the root of themselves, a warm recognition, a tuning of something that had been slightly off pitch. The holly wand rose slightly, an inch, perhaps 2, off Harry's palm, hanging there in the light it was generating, and then settled back, and the light faded, and Harry was sitting on the stool holding a wand with an expression that was completely calm except for the very slight wideness of his eyes. Ollivander sat down on the floor. Not in collapse, not dramatically, he simply sat down, as if his legs had made a unilateral executive decision that standing was no longer the correct response to the last 30 seconds. "Well," he said, from the floor. "That's never happened before." "Is that good?" Harry asked. "I believe so," Elijah said, from behind the pile of boxes that had removed themselves from nearby shelves with some force. He was brushing sawdust from his jacket with the expression of a man making a note about dry cleaning. "Broadly." "You could have warned me," Rebecca said to Klaus. "I didn't know," Klaus said. "You knew something would happen." "I knew something always happens with him," Klaus said. "I'm learning to broaden my expectations." Harry looked at the wand in his hand. He turned it once, feeling the weight, the warmth of it. Something settled in his face, not satisfaction, exactly, but a kind of rightness, the look of something fitting the way it was supposed to. He looked at Ollivander, who had gotten back to his feet with dignity intact. "Does it usually react to the bloodlines? The vampiric ones?" Ollivander looked at him with an expression Klaus had never seen on the old wandmaker before, the expression of a man who had encountered the edge of his own knowledge and found it genuinely interesting rather than troubling. "I wouldn't know," he said. "I've never made a wand for someone who had them." "You know what I am," Harry said. "I know what you are," Ollivander confirmed. "The wand doesn't care, apparently." He studied Harry for a moment. "Or rather, it cared more than it should." "That light, Mr. Potter. The last time something like that happened in this shop was 1899, when a wand chose a wizard who went on to rewrite the fundamental theory of magical cores." He paused. "I'm telling you this not to make you self-conscious about it, but because you should know the scale of what you're working with." "Right," Harry said, in the tone of someone adding this to the list and moving on. "How much is it?" 7 galleons, Ollivander said, and then, clearly fighting some internal battle with himself, added, "I don't charge for wands that do that, actually. Consider it a professional courtesy. And a personal interest." He looked at Harry with those odd pale eyes. "I expect I'll be watching your progress with considerable attention, Mr. Potter." "You and everyone else," Harry said, not bitterly, just factually, and hopped off the stool. Outside, the alley had the quality of a room after a noise, people standing slightly too still, conversations paused, the ambient buzz having shifted a tone. Several people were looking at the window of Ollivanders with a range of expressions from awed to alarmed. Harry walked out into it and looked up and down the street with the measuring expression he used when he was deciding how to enter a situation. Then he pushed his glasses up and said, "Books next," and walked. They were in flourish and blots when Dumbledore found them. Harry felt him before he saw him, not through the bloodlines, which had nothing to offer about wizards, but through that other sense, the one that lived in his scar, the one that had been quietly present since he'd started paying attention to it. A kind of awareness of significant magical presences, different from the ambient buzz of the alley, sharper and more specific. This particular presence was enormous. Old. And pointed directly at Harry. He was already turning when the bell above the bookshop door rang and Albus Dumbledore walked in. He was, exactly what he looked like. That was the first thing Harry registered. Most powerful people, Harry had found in 4 weeks of meeting them, had a gap between their appearance and their reality. They looked like one thing and were another, or they looked like nothing particular and were significant, or they performed a version of themselves for external consumption. Dumbledore's appearance and his reality were in complete alignment, which was more unsettling rather than less. Long white beard, half-moon spectacles, robes of deep blue scattered with silver moons, eyes the color of a clear sky that were currently doing the thing that eyes did when they found what they'd been looking for. "Harry," Dumbledore said, and his voice was warm and careful and had the quality of something reaching toward a specific frequency. "I had hoped I might find you here." "I've been meaning to, Professor Dumbledore," Harry said. He didn't back up. He'd been standing at a shelf reading the back covers of several books and he stayed exactly where he was, which put him about 4 feet from a man who was one of the most powerful wizards alive with complete composure. "I know who you are." "I should hope so," Dumbledore said, with the smile that Harry categorized immediately as the public one, genuine warmth as the vehicle for something more deliberate underneath it. "And I know who you are, of course." Though I confess, his eyes moved from Harry to Klaus, standing near the window again, and something moved behind those blue eyes that was brief and controlled but present. "You are somewhat different from what I expected to find." "Different how?" Harry asked. "I had expected to come and see you this summer," Dumbledore said, in the tone of someone redirecting gently. "To help you with the transition to Hogwarts. To explain some things about your history, your parents, I know about my history," Harry said. "And about my parents. I've been told." He held Dumbledore's gaze without difficulty. "Is there something specific you wanted to tell me? Something different from what I've already been told?" A very brief pause. Behind Harry, Elijah had set down the book he'd been looking at and was listening with the particular quality of attention he brought to negotiations. Klaus hadn't moved from the window, but Harry could feel, in the ambient awareness that living with the Mikaelsons had been developing in him, the change in his energy, a sharpening, attentive and watchful. "I wanted to welcome you to our world," Dumbledore said. "Properly. And to say that if you have questions, any questions, my door is always open." "I appreciate that," Harry said. "I'll keep it in mind." He looked at Dumbledore with those green eyes, steady and direct, and Dumbledore looked back at him, and in the space between them something was communicated that neither of them said aloud, a mutual, respectful, entirely clear acknowledgement that they each understood more than they were saying and that neither was going to pretend otherwise. "I see you found your wand," Dumbledore said, his eyes going to the Hollywood visible at Harry's side. "Ollivander told me, he contacted me, in fact, which he doesn't do often. He said something quite remarkable happened." "The wand chose me," Harry said simply. "That's how it works." "Yes," Dumbledore said slowly. "It is." He studied Harry for one more moment, and in his expression, alongside the genuine warmth and the genuine calculation, there was a third thing, something more complicated, something that recognized, perhaps, that the 7-year-old left at the Dursleys had become something rather different from what had been planned. Not regret, exactly. But an adjustment being made in real time. "I look forward to seeing you at Hogwarts, Harry," he said. "I'm looking forward to it," Harry said, and meant it, and let Dumbledore draw his own conclusions about what that meant. Dumbledore smiled, and it was the genuine one this time, which was interesting, as if Harry's forward-looking candor had reached something past the performance. He nodded once, to Harry, and once to Klaus in a way that carried the weight of an acknowledgement between two very old, very powerful things that were going to need to understand each other eventually, and then he left. The bookshop settled back into its ordinary atmosphere. Harry turned to the shelf and continued reading the back covers as if nothing had happened. Rebecca appeared beside him. "That was impressive," she said quietly. "He was being genuine," Harry said, not looking away from the shelf. "But he was also doing something else at the same time. He wants something from me, or wants something about me, and the warmth is real, but it's also a vehicle for the wanting. Both things are true." He pulled a book from the shelf and added it to his pile. "I haven't figured out what he wants yet." "You will," Rebecca said. "I know," Harry said, without arrogance, just certainty, and she looked at the side of his face with something that was partly pride and partly the specific ache of someone watching someone they care about be more prepared for the world than they should have needed to be. They completed the supply list efficiently. Robes at Madame Malkin's, where Harry stood very still for the fitting and absorbed the frank stares of the other children with equanimity, and where Draco Malfoy, being fitted in the next spot, said something about Muggleborns in the tone of someone checking whether casual contempt was accepted currency, and Harry looked at him once with an expression so devoid of the anticipated reactions that Draco faltered mid-sentence and didn't finish it. Cauldrons, telescope, scales. The apothecary, which Harry moved through with focused interest, asking the proprietor 3 questions that made the man look at him with surprise. Lastly, Gringotts, not for the Heir account, which had been managed already, but for the Potter vault. Harry's vault. It was considerably more substantial than a side storage chamber. The cart took them deep, and the door that opened when Harry touched it revealed a room that breathed with gold, stacked towers of it catching the torchlight, bags of silver and bronze and various magical coinage that no longer circulated mixed throughout. Harry stood in the entrance and looked at it with the expression of someone recalibrating a set of assumptions. "This is mine," he said. "Yes," Klaus said. Harry was quiet for a moment. "My parents left it." "Yes." He walked in. He didn't go to the gold. He went to the back corner where there was a small locked box separate from the main wealth, the kind of secondary storage people used for things that weren't about money, and he touched it with one hand and it opened, responding to him, to his blood, the way the vault door had. Inside were photographs and a letter folded many times and a small silver bracelet with a charm on it that Harry looked at for a long time before putting carefully in his pocket without explanation. He took some gold because they said he should, because school supplies weren't free, but he moved through the vault quickly after that, and when they left he was quiet in the cart back to the surface with the particular quiet of someone holding something carefully. No one commented on it. This was something Harry had already come to understand about this family: they allowed silences to be what they were, didn't rush to fill them with comfort that hadn't been asked for. Rebecca sat beside him in the cart with their shoulders almost touching and said nothing, which was its own kind of statement. Back in the alley, emerging into the afternoon light, Harry stopped on the pavement outside Gringotts and said, "She left a note. In the box. My mum." He was looking at the street, not at any of them. "She wrote it when I was born. She said," his voice was even, carefully so. "She said that whatever happened, I should know that I was wanted. That she'd been waiting for me." A brief pause. "She couldn't have known she'd need to leave a note like that. You don't think about that when you write it. You think you'll just tell them." No one said anything for a moment. The alley moved around them in its ordinary way, its noise and its commerce, the entirely ordinary miracle of people going about their lives. "No," Klaus said. "You don't." Harry looked at him. Something in Klaus's voice had been different on those 3 words, not performed empathy, but something personal, something with weight behind it that Harry read and didn't ask about yet, the instinctive decorum of someone who understood what it meant when someone gave you a true thing briefly. "She'd have liked you, I think," Harry said. "She made protective enchantments that changed the rules. Elijah said she innovated magic that had never been done before." He looked at Klaus. "You do that? Change the rules?" "Your mother was a remarkable witch," Elijah said quietly. "I know," Harry said. He straightened, pushed his glasses, looked down the alley toward the leaky cauldron. "Can we get food? I want to try the place with the pies." And just like that, the weight of it settled into its proper place, not resolved, not dismissed, but stored carefully alongside the bracelet and the letter, carried rather than put down. Harry walked toward the pie shop with his school books under one arm and his new wand in his pocket and the gold angrief of an afternoon's inheritance, and Klaus walked beside him, and Elijah followed, and Rebecca caught up from behind and said, "The pies here are extraordinary, you need to know that going in so the quality doesn't shock you." "Can quality be shocking?" Harry said. "When you're not used to it," Rebecca said. "Yes, absolutely." Harry considered this seriously. "Okay," he said. "Warn me again right before I take a bite." "Deal," she said, and the afternoon took them in. That evening, after Harry had gone upstairs, full for once, actually full, having eaten 2 pies and a considerable amount of whatever the shop's dessert was and worn the slightly stunned expression of someone discovering that food could be genuinely good rather than merely adequate, Klaus sat in the study with Elijah and the specific quality of quiet they used for honest conversation. "Dumbledore is going to be a problem," Klaus said. "He's going to try to reassert influence," Elijah agreed. "He had a design for the boy. We've disrupted it considerably." "He's not wrong that Voldemort will return," Klaus said. "And he's not wrong that Harry will need to be part of dealing with it. But his method required Harry to be available," Elijah said. "Accessible. Shaped by deprivation in ways that would make him easy to direct." He set down his glass. "We've made him considerably less accessible and significantly less directable." "Good," Klaus said. "Yes," Elijah said. "But Dumbledore won't see it that way, and he will act carefully, intelligently, with entirely genuine concern alongside his agenda." He looked at Klaus. "That combination is harder to counter than simple opposition." "Harry can handle him," Klaus said. "Harry is 8, Elijah said. "Almost 8, Klaus said, and the ghost of what Harry would have said with the exact same correction crossed through the room between them, and Elijah almost smiled. "He is," Elijah conceded. "And extraordinary. But extraordinary and ready are different things." "Then we make sure he's ready," Klaus said. "Hogwarts gives us a year. He'll learn what the school can teach him and we'll give him the rest. By the time Dumbledore thinks he's ready to put pieces in play, Harry will already be 5 moves ahead." Elijah was quiet. "And Voldemort?" Klaus looked at the fire. The scar on Harry's forehead. The pull of old dark magic, present since October 1981. The boy who'd said it's here and touched his forehead with the matter-of-fact certainty of someone who had already located the problem and was simply waiting for the right time to address it. "When he comes back," Klaus said, "he's going to find that what he's returning to is nothing like what he remembers." He looked at Elijah. The last time, he was afraid of a prophecy. This time, he'll be afraid of the boy. Elijah looked at the fire too, for a long moment. "And the boy?" he said quietly. "Is he afraid?" Klaus thought about Harry in the vault, holding out his hand without flinching. Harry in the sitting room, telling Voss with perfect, unembellished calm that the right had held. Harry at Ollivander's, walking out of white light with an expression of mild interest. Harry reading a note from his dead mother and then asking about pie. "No," Klaus said. "He's not." Upstairs, Harry lay in his bed with the blue duvet and the yellow stars on his pajamas, and held the silver bracelet above his face in the dark, the small charm catching no light because there wasn't any, just the shape of it by memory, his mother's last touch, preserved in silver. The bloodlines moved around him like a slow tide, 1,000 presences in their distant places, aware of him as he was aware of them, the vast settled network of 1,000 years of power finding its rest, all of it pointing here, all of it holding. He put the bracelet on his wrist. It fit. He thought about the school, and the things he'd learned there, and the man with the warm blue eyes who wanted something, and the dark thing in his scar that waited with patient wrongness, and the wand on his bedside table that had filled a shop with light. He was not afraid of any of it. He was something else, the thing that came before readiness, that lived underneath courage, that was not excitement and not certainty but some combination of both that hadn't been named because most people didn't stay still long enough for it to settle in them. He was prepared. September the 1st, he decided, could not come fast enough. He closed his eyes, and the bloodlines breathed around him, and he slept. Chapter 4. The sorting and the Storm King's Cross was loud in the specific way of places where large numbers of people were all trying to accomplish the same thing in the same narrow window of time. Trolleys and trunks and owls in cages and children running the emotional range from thrilled to terrified, parents saying goodbye in the particular compressed way of people who had rehearsed casualness over breakfast and were finding it harder to maintain now that the platform was real and the train was real and the goodbye was real. Harry moved through it without rushing. He had his trunk, Hedwig in her cage, a gift from Elijah, who had said with characteristic understatement that owls were practical and Harry should have one, and then spent 20 minutes selecting the right one with the seriousness of someone choosing an ambassador, and the quiet self-containment he'd arrived at the Kensington house with and had kept, though it sat differently on him now. Less like armor and more like posture. The difference between bracing and simply standing straight. Klaus walked beside him. Elijah and Rebecca had come to King's Cross and said goodbye outside, Rebecca with her arms around Harry for long enough that he'd gone slightly pink and hadn't pulled away, Elijah with a handshake that was somehow warmer than most embraces and a quiet word that Harry had nodded at seriously. Klaus would see him through the barrier and that was the arrangement, and Harry had said it was fine, he wasn't nervous, and Klaus had said he knew, and meant it. Platform 9 3/4, Klaus said, reading the ticket. Between 9 and 10, Harry said. He looked at the barrier, the solid, perfectly ordinary-looking pillar between platforms 9 and 10, and then walked at it without breaking stride. The magic took him through smoothly, the barrier yielding like a curtain, and then he was in the steam and the noise of the wizarding platform where the Hogwarts Express sat red and gleaming and exhaling great rolling clouds of white, and the crowd here was different, all of them magic, the ambient buzz of it 10 times what Diagon Alley had been. Children and parents and trunks and familiars in a concentrated space that smelled of coal and parchment and the particular sweetness of magical confectionery already emerging from bottomless pockets. Harry stood for a moment. He felt the bloodlines as he'd been learning to feel them, background, steady, the sound below the sound, and beneath them the other thing, the scar sense, the awareness of significant magical presences. Several of them on this platform. Not dangerous, not yet, but notable. He'd developed a rough scale over the summer, most witches and wizards were ambient, like furniture in a room with them. A few were distinct, like lit candles. Dumbledore at Flourish and Blots had been like a bonfire. What he felt on this platform was mostly candles. Klaus came through the barrier behind him. He was, Harry had observed, the only person in the vicinity who made the Hogwarts Express look like it was the background element and he was the foreground one. The train leaves at 11, Klaus said. That's, he checked, 14 minutes. I know, Harry said. You can go. I'm going, Klaus said, and didn't move. Harry looked up at him with the measuring expression, and then something in his face did the thing it occasionally did when he stopped choosing what it showed. Not emotion exactly, but the acknowledgement of it, a brief, true look that didn't dress itself up. All right, he said. You will, Klaus agreed. Hedwig's fast, apparently. Elijah checked. Elijah checks everything. It's useful, Harry said. Yes, Klaus agreed, and the agreement covered more than the owl. Harry looked at the train. Looked back. If something happens, I'll know, Klaus said. The bloodlines, remember? If something is genuinely wrong, I'll feel the disruption before you finish writing the letter. He held Harry's gaze. Nothing at that school is a match for what you are. You know that. I know, Harry said. Then, quieter, I'm not worried about being a match for things. I'm worried about, he stopped, finding the words. Being alone again. In a place where everyone else knows each other already. Klaus was quiet for a moment. This was the thing, he'd learned, about Harry, the real things came out sideways, not in dramatic moments but in the small, unstaged seconds between things. The vault hadn't been where Harry had been most honest. The kitchen had. The landing. The car rides. The small uncurated pauses. You're not the same person you were in June, Klaus said. That boy was alone because no one had told him he didn't have to be. You know now. He looked at Harry steadily. Take up space. You've earned it. Harry held his gaze for a moment, and then nodded, not the quick nod of acknowledgement but the slower one, the kind that meant something was being committed to, and picked up Hedwig's cage and walked to the train without looking back, because looking back at the last second undid things. Klaus watched him go, and stayed on the platform until the train moved, and then left in the way he did things, completely, no lingering at the barrier. The train was full by the time Harry found a compartment, most of them already claimed by groups of returning students who'd been saving seats since they boarded. He found one with a single occupant, a girl sitting very straight with a book open in her lap and a slightly aggressive quality of personal space around her that was communicating very clearly that she was fine alone, thank you, and didn't need company, but had left the door open, which suggested something contradicted the communication. Harry opened the door. Is this seat taken? The girl looked up. Brown eyes, brown hair pulled back, the assessing expression of someone smart enough to know they were being assessed in return. Her gaze went to his forehead and then, deliberately, back to his face. No, she said. You're Harry Potter. Yes, Harry said, putting Hedwig's cage on the rack and his trunk in the overhead space with the ease of someone who'd spent the summer in a house where things were done without fuss. You are? Hermione Granger, she said. I've read about you. Most people have, Harry said, sitting down. What did they get wrong? She blinked. Sorry? The books, Harry said. What did they get wrong? There are always inaccuracies. Hermione Granger sat with her book open in her lap and stared at him with the expression of someone encountering an unexpected variable. You've read them, she said. I've read everything about myself I could find, Harry said. It seemed like useful information. Half of it contradicts the other half. He settled back in the seat. The part where they claim I cried when Hagrid left me at the Dursleys is definitely wrong. I was one. I don't think I was aware enough to cry about a specific departure. You were probably crying because you were one, Hermione said, with a slight defensive logic about it. Possibly, Harry conceded. What's the book? Hogwarts, a history, she said. I've read it twice. The section on the founding is actually quite thin, given how much source material must exist. Does it cover the magical theory behind the sorting? Harry asked. She looked at him again, this time with the particular expression of someone realizing a conversation was going to be better than anticipated. The hat's magic is a piece of Gryffindor's original enchantment, she said, but the actual sorting mechanism isn't fully explained in any published source. I've looked. I have a theory, Harry said. So do I, she said immediately. They argued about it companionably for 20 minutes, and by the time the food trolley came past, Hermione Granger had the air of someone who had expected to spend this journey reading alone and had found this to be not entirely unwelcome as an alternative. The door slid open again around noon, admitting a red-headed boy with a smear of something on his nose and the easy confidence of someone who had enough brothers that compartment doors had never really been obstacles. He looked at Harry, looked at Hermione, looked at the available seats and said, "Any chance? Everywhere else is rammed." "Sit," Harry said. "Cheers." He dropped into the seat across from Harry with the easy physicality of someone comfortable in their body. "Ron Weasley. Have you got any?" His eyes landed on the pile of confectionery Harry had bought from the trolley, which was considerable because Harry had spent the summer learning that food could be good and was currently in the exploratory phase of that discovery. "Oh. Brilliant. What's the chocolate frog odds on Merlin, do you think?" "I've got 12 doubles." "Keep or trade?" Harry asked. "Trade, need Agrippa." "I've got an Agrippa," Harry said, reaching for his cards. Ron Weasley's face did the thing faces did when an unexpectedly good day got better. His name was Ron, he had 6 siblings, his father worked at the ministry in a department that dealt with Muggle objects and found the whole subject completely fascinating, and he'd grown up in a house that was too small and too full of magic and too loud and which he clearly loved with the unexamined totality of someone who had never had to question whether they were loved back. He looked at Harry's scar once, with the frank interest of a child who had been told the story and was now calibrating reality against expectation, and then moved on from it in a way that was deeply refreshing, not because he wasn't impressed, but because he was also interested in about 40 other things simultaneously and the scar was simply one of them. "Are you actually as good at Quidditch as they say?" Ron asked. "I've never played," Harry said. Ron looked at him the way people looked at statements that didn't compute. "Never? But, I grew up with Muggles," Harry said. "They don't fly." "Right," Ron said, processing this. "Right, obviously. Well, you'll be brilliant. You've got the build for Seeker." Fred and George say, he launched into an analysis of Quidditch positions and their physical requirements that was detailed enough to suggest either genuine expertise or a family that talked about Quidditch with the seriousness of a strategic operation. Harry listened with interest. Hermione pretended not to listen while clearly filing everything away. They were still talking, all 3 of them now, Hermione having opinions about the aerodynamics of broomstick models that Ron considered irrelevant but was finding hard to dismiss, when the compartment door opened for the 3rd time and introduced a different quality of energy into the space. Draco Malfoy. Harry had read about the Malfoy family over the summer. Elijah had, in his methodical way, provided a brief on the significant families of the wizarding world, and the Malfoys had featured as a family whose history was interesting and whose recent choices were not old money, old magic, old allegiances to a thing that had been defeated 6 years ago and which, based on everything Harry knew, was not as defeated as people wanted to believe. Draco Malfoy at 11 looked like all of that compressed into a person. He stood in the doorway with 2 large boys behind him who seemed to exist primarily as architectural features, wide and useful and not much else, and looked at Harry with the expression of someone who had been practicing an entrance and was currently delivering it. Harry looked back at him without altering his posture. "Harry Potter," Draco said, with the particular emphasis of someone performing familiarity they hadn't earned. "I'd heard you were on the train." "I'm Malfoy. Draco Malfoy." "I know who you are," Harry said. Something shifted fractionally in Draco's expression, not enough that most people would have caught it, but Harry was not most people. The slight recalibration of a person who had expected a different first line in this conversation. "Right," Draco said, recovering. You wanted to see what I was like," Harry said. "Not unkindly, just directly. Whether the stories were true. Whether I was worth knowing." He tilted his head. "Which is fair enough. People are curious." Draco stared at him. The architecture behind him stared too, though with less interpretive range. "So," Harry said. "Now you've seen. What do you think?" The question was so cleanly reversed from what Draco had planned that it left him in the position of having walked into a room and found the furniture rearranged. He looked at Harry for a moment with something that was working its way through several layers, the performance peeling back slightly to reveal genuine assessment underneath. He looked at Hermione and Ron, who were watching with different flavors of interest. "I think," Draco said, slowly, "that you're not what I expected." "No one is," Harry said. "Do you want to sit?" The architecture at the door made a sound that suggested this was not part of the plan. "Crabbe, Goyle," Draco said, without turning. "Go and find somewhere else." He looked at the seat next to Hermione with a calculation working visibly behind his grey eyes, and then he came in and sat down, and the door slid closed. It was not a friendship. Harry didn't think it was going to be one, not straightforwardly. The values in Draco's architecture were too different from his own, the things he'd been raised to consider important too far from Harry's current frame of reference. But it was something. An opening, maybe. A question that hadn't decided on an answer yet. They talked for the rest of the journey. Not warmly, not in the way Harry talked to Hermione or Ron, but with the specific interest of two people taking each other's measure and finding the measurement genuinely worth doing. Draco said things that were wrong, about blood status, about which families mattered, and Harry disagreed with him plainly, without heat, in a way that clearly unsettled Draco because he was used to disagreement coming either with deference or with hostility, and Harry's version had neither. When they reached Hogwarts and the train slowed and the castle appeared through the window, vast and lit and sitting on its cliff above the lake with the particular authority of something that had existed for so long it had become geological, Harry looked at it and felt something he hadn't expected. The scar sense flared. Not danger, not the wrongness of the dark thing in his head. Something else. A recognition, the way the wand had recognized the bloodlines, the way the blood rite had recognized something in him that preceded the rite itself. The castle recognized him. Or something in the castle did, something old and deeply embedded in the stones, and it pressed against that awareness the way a sound pressed against the ear before you'd identified what made it. He held Hermione's gaze briefly across the compartment and she tilted her head in question, reading something in his face. "It's fine," he said. "The castle's interesting." "The wards," she said immediately. "They're supposedly the most complex sustained enchantment in Britain. Possibly in Europe." "Yes," Harry said, looking at it through the glass. "I can feel them." Hermione stared at him. "You can feel them? Can't you?" "No," she said. "That's not, most people can't feel wards." Harry considered this. Filed it. The scale of what he could perceive was still something he was mapping, the edges of it irregular and not yet fully explored. Hagrid's call of Fur's years, this way, cut through the platform noise, and Harry climbed down into the cold Scottish night and followed the lantern toward the boats and the lake and the castle that was watching him with its complicated stone attention. The boats crossed in a silence that even the most excited first-years seemed to fall into, the castle growing above them as they neared, reflections breaking and reforming on the black water. Harry sat in the prow of a boat with Hermione beside him and Ron across, and looked up at the lit windows and felt the wards pressing around them like a second atmosphere, dense and ancient and, not welcoming, exactly, not yet, but aware. The great hall was everything Elijah had described and still somehow more. For long tables beneath a ceiling that Hermione identified immediately in a whispered aside as charmed to reflect the sky, currently clear and star-scattered. Hundreds of candles. The weight of 150 children trying very hard to be calm about the fact that they were here, that this was real, that the world they'd been told about was standing up and being solid around them. Harry sat at the end of the line of first-years waiting for the sorting and watched Professor McGonagall, straight-backed and precise, with the quality of someone who had been maintaining standards for decades and intended to continue, explain what was going to happen. The hat on its stool. The names called alphabetically. He felt Dumbledore. At the head table, in the center chair, the bonfire quality of him visible even at this distance, those blue eyes making their way along the line of first-years and arriving at Harry with the comfortable familiarity of someone visiting a thought they'd been having all summer. Harry looked back. Gave a small nod. Looked away. By the time his name was called, the hall had already been through 3/4 of the alphabet, and the response to "Potter, Harry" was what he'd expected, a ripple, a shift, the collective energy of 250 people redirecting attention. He walked to the stool and sat down and let the hat come over his eyes and the brim drop to his glasses. "Oh," said a voice that wasn't a sound, that was directly in his head, dry and ancient and very specifically paying attention. "Oh, this is interesting." "What is?" Harry thought back. "You," the hat said. "You're not what you were supposed to be, are you? The blueprint's entirely different." A pause, the quality of something shuffling through files, reading fast. "Gryffindor, clearly, courage to the bone, that's not in question. But there's," a longer pause. "There's something else in here. Old. Very old. It doesn't come from the wizarding tradition at all. Sorting through. You could be great in any of them, you know. The ambition's there, the intelligence, the loyalty. But you already know where you belong, don't you?" "I think so," Harry thought. "But it's your call." "It's always the ones who don't argue with me," the hat said, and there was something in the voice that might have been the hat's version of warmth, "who are the most interesting." "Gryffindor." The last word boomed aloud into the hall, and the Gryffindor table came up with the particular enthusiasm of a house that had been told it was getting something significant before the year even started, and Harry walked to the table and sat down next to a boy with a round face and a toad in his pocket who introduced himself as Neville Longbottom and shook Harry's hand with both of his, which was an oddly formal gesture for an 11-year-old and which Harry found he liked immediately. Across the hall, at the Slytherin table, Draco Malfoy was watching him. When their eyes met, Draco gave a small, fractional nod that meant nothing specific and everything in general. Harry nodded back. The feast was extraordinary. Harry ate with the focused appreciation of someone who was still, 3 months in, astonished by the quality of food that was simply available to him as a matter of course, and talked to Neville about toads, which turned out to be a rich subject, given Neville's considerable knowledge of magical herbology and the overlap between that and amphibian habitats, and to Ron about Quidditch, and to Hermione about the flaw in his sorting hat theory that the actual hat had implied he might have had. The right base. He was paying attention to the staff table throughout. Dumbledore, at the center, warm and watchful. McGonagall, to his right, efficient and fair. A man in purple turbaned robes with the specific quality of contained wrongness that Harry had felt through his scar once before, much closer now, not faint, not below threshold. Present. Alive. He turned it over quietly while he ate. The dark thing in his scar. The man at the staff table with the wrongness in him, the sense of a presence that occupied the same space as the man's own presence rather than being it. There are 2 things in that man, Harry thought, eating a roast potato. The man, and something else. He didn't tell anyone that night. Not because he was hiding it, but because he was still reading the shape of it, and he didn't speak about things until he understood what he was saying. After dinner, after the moving staircases and the portrait passwords and the Gryffindor common room that smelled of old wood and fire and the accumulated warmth of centuries of students who'd lived in it, after Neville's heartfelt eulogy over the discovery that Trevor the Toad had survived the journey in his pocket, after Hermione had organized her things with the efficiency of a small general establishing a supply chain, after all of it, Harry sat in the armchair by the fire in the empty common room because he'd let everyone else go up first, and thought. He thought about the man at the staff table. About the castle's awareness, pressing around him. About Dumbledore's eyes at dinner, moving along the table and finding Harry twice and doing the thing the bonfire did when a new piece of wood was added. He thought about what was in his scar and how long it had been there and what it was waiting for. He thought about what Klaus would say, and heard it clearly without having to imagine hard. Don't overthink it. Gather information. Don't act until you understand the shape of the thing you're acting on. He took out a piece of parchment and wrote. The professor who teaches defense against the dark arts has something wrong with him. Not him, in him. The same quality as what's in my scar, just located somewhere on his person. I think you should know. I'm not in danger and I'm not acting on it yet, just watching. The castle is very interesting. It can feel me. I think I can feel it back. The food here is excellent. I'm all right. Hedwig took the letter with professional dignity and disappeared through the window into the Scottish dark. Harry sat by the fire for another few minutes, the Gryffindor common room warm and empty around him, the bloodlines their usual steady presence, the castle pressing its ancient awareness against the edges of his perception like a friend learning his name. Then he went to bed, and the first day of the rest of the story settled itself into the past tense, and tomorrow the real work began. He was not afraid of it. He was, in the particular vocabulary of someone who had learned over a summer to name their own states, genuinely looking forward to it. He fell asleep with the bloodlines around him like a tide, and the castle noting him, and the dark thing in the defense professor 3 floors below and 3 years from doing what it was going to do, and Harry Potter, almost 9 years old now, heir to 1,000 years of the strongest blood on earth, slept without one moment of the listening for footsteps that had been the background music of the first 7 years of his life. Just sleep. Clean and complete. Chapter 5, Blood and Stone. The thing about Quirrell was that he tried too hard to seem harmless. Harry had noticed it in the first week, the stutter, the nervous laugh, the way he flinched from loud sounds in a manner that was technically convincing and completely wrong, the way a note played just slightly off pitch was technically a note. Real nervousness had an organic quality, unpredictable in its timing, appearing when the stimulus wasn't obvious. Quirrell's nervousness appeared on schedule, when people were watching, and went away when he thought they weren't. Harry watched him not being nervous when he thought no one was looking. Watched the stillness underneath the performance, which was a different kind of stillness from the one Klaus had. Klaus was still the way old predators were still, with intention under the surface. Quirrell's stillness was the stillness of something listening. Something that lived in the back of that man's head behind the turban, occupying his nerve endings like a tenant, and had to suppress its own fundamental quality every time the body it wore walked into a room full of children. He told Hermione in October, in the library, because she was the person at Hogwarts most likely to treat the information as information rather than as either panic or hero worship. She looked up from her charms notes and he watched her face go through its processing sequence, the initial reaction suppressed, the cross-referencing, the conclusion forming. "The turban," she said. "Yes," Harry said. "You're sure it's not residual from the curse? Your scar can feel dark magic in general, presumably. Maybe he just deals with dark objects." "The quality's different," Harry said. "Dark magic that's been handled leaves a trace, like smoke after a fire. This is more like a fire that's still going." Present tense. He was quiet for a moment. "And I recognize it. Specifically. From my scar." Hermione's quill had stopped moving. "You're saying Voldemort is attached to Quirrell." "I'm saying something that feels exactly like the thing in my scar is attached to Quirrell," Harry said carefully. "I don't know the mechanism. But yes." She was very still for a moment, the stillness of someone revising the size of a situation. Then she picked up her quill and wrote something on a new piece of parchment that wasn't Charm's notes. "We need to know what he's here for," she said. "He's not here because he enjoys teaching, the class is completely disorganized, no coherent curriculum, and someone at his alleged level of scholarship would find it humiliating. He's here because there's something at Hogwarts he wants. Or that Voldemort wants," Harry said. "Same thing right now," Hermione said. "What's at Hogwarts that's worth having?" They had the answer by November, through the particular combination of Hermione's research efficiency, Ron's accidental intelligence about the break-in at Gringotts Vault 713 in August, and Harry's awareness of the third-floor corridor, which pressed against his scar sense every time he walked near it with the specific insistence of something significant contained, like feeling heat through a closed door. The Philosopher's Stone. Nicholas Flamel. A dog with 3 heads that Harry could hear through the floor of the corridor with his enhanced perception, a rumble of 3 breathing cycles slightly out of sync, and beneath it the multiple layers of enchantment that various professors had apparently contributed with the collective confidence of a faculty that considered a giant three-headed dog a reasonable first line of defense. "They're relying on the stone being hard to find," Harry said, in the slightly exasperated tone he used when examining other people's logic. "And the layers of protection. But if someone already knows it's there, then the layers are the only obstacle," Hermione finished. "And someone's already tried once. The Gringotts break-in was the same day Hagrid collected something from Vault 713. She looked at her notes. "The vault was emptied before the break-in. Whatever was in it was moved here. Where Quirrell can reach it," Ron said. He'd been listening from across the table with the focused expression he got when Quidditch strategy or genuine danger organized his attention. "So he's just waiting? For a chance?" "Waiting, and trying," Harry said. "I think the dog's been disturbed more than once. It's unsettled." He paused. "Also there's a mirror." They both looked at him. "I felt it last week, near the restricted section. A very old enchantment, different from the protective layers on the stone. Something reflective with an internal logic built in, a conditional. Something you have to want in a specific way to satisfy." He thought about it. "Someone put it in the protection sequence deliberately. It's clever." "Whose enchantment?" Hermione asked. "Feels like Dumbledore," Harry said. The name sat in the library air for a moment. "He knows," Hermione said slowly. "Dumbledore knows about Quirrell." "I think he knows something is testing the protections," Harry said. "I don't know if he knows it's specifically Quirrell. Or specifically what's in Quirrell." He looked at the table. "I don't know if I should tell him." "Why wouldn't you?" Ron said. "Because his solution will involve removing Harry from the situation," Hermione said, with the certainty of someone who had been applying logical models to Dumbledore's behavior since September. "He'll treat it as a threat to be managed, not information to be used." "It's both," Harry said. "Yes," Hermione said. "But he'll manage it in a way that involves Harry being managed. Kept away from it. Protected." She looked at Harry. "You're not going to let that happen?" "No," Harry said pleasantly. "Good," she said, and went back to her notes with the brisk energy of someone who had established the relevant constraints and was now working within them. He wrote to Klaus in December, the letter more detailed than his previous ones, which had been regular and informative without being urgent. This one was urgent. Klaus's response came back in 18 hours, which meant Hedwig had pushed it, which meant Klaus had sent her back immediately without sleeping, which meant he'd read it and made a decision without much deliberation. "Don't go near it alone. Don't tell Dumbledore yet, not because he's an enemy, but because his first move will be to remove you from proximity and that may not be the correct play. Watch Quirrell. If the situation moves toward action before term ends, write immediately. I can be at Hogwarts in hours. You're doing exactly the right things. Keep doing them. Don't let the mirror in the protection sequence become a problem for you. Its condition is based on desire without self-interest. If you already know what you are and have stopped wanting things for the wrong reasons, it won't hold you. Trust what you feel." Harry read it twice, held it, folded it. The thing about Klaus's letters was that they never told him what to do in the way of someone managing a piece on a board. They told him what to consider, and trusted him to conclude correctly. It was, Harry had come to understand, a form of respect that he hadn't known to identify before this year, because he hadn't had enough of it to recognize its shape. December progressed with the specific intensity of a term end at a school where 60% of the students were trying to prepare for exams while the other 40% had apparently decided this was the ideal time for interpersonal drama. Harry passed his exams with the efficiency of someone who had been reading ahead since September, not showing off, just thorough, finishing his papers without drama and sitting quietly until time was called because there was no performance value in finishing early and he disliked performance. His marks came back at the top of year across every subject, which produced different reactions from different people, Ron said, brilliant, with uncomplicated admiration. Hermione said, we're tied in most of them. I want to discuss your charm's approach, with the specific energy of someone treating competition as a learning resource. Professor McGonagall told him the transfiguration mark was the highest she'd given in 7 years with a directness that made it clear she expected him to continue doing exactly that. Professor Flitwick patted his arm so enthusiastically he nearly fell off his stack of books. Quirrell avoided his eyes in defense class with the studied quality of avoidance. Harry watched him not look and thought about fires behind closed doors. January brought the new term and the particular fresh start quality of a castle that had been emptied for Christmas and was refilling itself with the accumulated energy of 400 students returning simultaneously. Harry had stayed at Hogwarts for the holiday, partly because the alternative was returning to Kensington and then coming back, which seemed inefficient, and partly because the castle in December was extraordinary, quieter, deeper, the stones more audible without the student noise, the wards more perceptible as distinct layers rather than a general presence. He'd spent Christmas Day writing letters and reading by the common room fire and eating the holiday feast with the small group of students who'd stayed, and the day had been quiet in the way that quiet had been reclaimed, over the course of this year, from its previous association with absence. Quiet used to mean alone and waiting. Now it meant something closer to peace. Klaus had sent him books. Elijah had sent books and a letter that was 6 pages long and covered the history of the Philosopher's Stone in a way that, Elijah noted with characteristic dryness, was purely educational. Rebecca had sent a parcel of food items from the best bakery in Paris, which had arrived still warm through some enchantment that Harry suspected wasn't strictly standard owl post, and a card that said simply "We miss you. Don't do anything reckless without telling us first." He'd eaten the Paris pastries in the common room and felt the bloodlines their warm background constant and felt the castle noting him with its deep stone awareness and been, genuinely, happy. The stone moved in February. Harry felt the shift before he understood it, a change in the quality of the third-floor corridor's emanation, the contained fire heat moving differently, as if whatever was generating it had changed location within the sequence of protections. He was at breakfast when he felt it and he went still over his porridge and extended his awareness carefully through the castle's layered geography. Something was in the third-floor corridor. At the door, pressing at it. Not the stone itself, the stone was deeper, still behind its protections, but the wrongness that lived in Quirrell's body, awake and purposeful at 7 in the morning while the great hall full of students ate breakfast below it. Harry caught Hermione's eye across the table. Then Ron's. He stood up from breakfast. Ron caught up in the corridor. Now, he said, reading Harry's face with the ease of 5 months' practice. He's in the corridor, Harry said. It hasn't moved into the sequence yet, he's at the door still, but if he gets through Fluffy, how do you want to do this? Ron said, with the matter-of-fact quality of someone who had made his decision about following a long time ago and wasn't revisiting it. I want to know what the final protection is before he reaches it, Harry said. I can feel the mirror's logic but I need to be sure. If it's what I think, then you're the only one who can get to the stone without triggering it, Hermione said, appearing on Harry's other side with the coat she'd clearly grabbed on her way out. Because you want it found but not used. Yes, Harry said. We go through, then, she said. All 3 of us. We handle what we can handle, and you go ahead when we hit the mirror. You don't have to, Harry began. Harry, Ron said. Please. Harry looked at both of them. Don't tell Dumbledore yet, he said. After. After, Hermione agreed. They went upstairs. The third-floor corridor had the quality of a space that had recently been disturbed, the wards vibrating at a slightly higher frequency, the air displaced. The door to Fluffy's chamber was open. The dog was asleep. Not drugged, Harry could feel its consciousness still, large and triple and snarling just below the surface of sleep, its 3 heads at varying angles of unconsciousness on the stone floor. A small harp near the door was playing itself, the notes thin and continuous, barely audible, the enchantment fading as the spell lost its caster's proximity. He went through already, Harry said quietly. They found the trapdoor open and went down one by one, landing in the devil's snare that Hermione identified and dealt with in under 20 seconds, not because she was showing off but because she knew what it was and the fastest path through it. The flying keys were a longer delay, the enchanted chamber full of winged keys wheeling and diving and the broomstick waiting in the corner, and Harry was in the air before either of the others had reached it, his Quidditch reflexes from 4 months of training finding the correct key in 40 seconds, the right one rust-spotted and bent-winged from being the one caught the most, and he had it and the door was open. Ron played the chess game. Harry watched him do it with something that he didn't have a clean word for, the specific quality of watching someone you know be something you hadn't fully anticipated they were. Ron played the chess game like someone who had been born for exactly this problem, moving pieces with the calm authority of a general, sacrificing strategically with the detachment of someone who understood that the difference between winning and losing was the ability to give something up, and he directed Harry and Hermione through to the last row and then said, very calmly, "You'll need to take me. The King's Knight. It'll give Harry Queen's file." "Ron," Hermione began. "I know what I'm doing," Ron said. "Go. Both of you go." Harry looked at him. Ron looked back with the steady brown eyes of someone who had made a decision and wasn't interested in dramatic confirmation of it. "Thank you," Harry said. "After," Ron said. "Tell me after. Go." The troll beyond the chess room was already down, someone else had handled it, recently, the marks of the encounter still fresh in the stone floor. Hermione went to the potions room, 7 bottles, a logical puzzle, the kind of thing that would defeat someone without her particular architecture of mind and took her 3 minutes, and she handed Harry the correct bottle and said, "There's only enough for one. I'll go back for Ron. You go on." Harry looked at her. She was holding herself very straight, which was what she did when she was managing something emotionally complex at the same time as a practical problem. "You already know what he needs," she said. "I don't." "You go." He took the bottle. "Tell Klaus if this goes wrong," he said. "Not Dumbledore first. Klaus first." "I know," she said. "I already wrote the letter. It's in my bag. Hedwig's waiting." He had a moment of being very specifically grateful for Hermione Granger, and then he drank the small bottle and went through the black flame. On the other side was the mirror. It was enormous, taller than the chamber's ceiling by rights, framed in gold, the inscription arched across the top in a language Harry recognized from Elijah's teaching as a scrambled form of Latin. Erist stra eru oit uber kafru oit onwosi. He'd translated it in October when he'd first felt it through the castle's geography, sitting in the library with a Latin primer, "I show not your face but your heart's desire." He looked into it. He saw himself. Standing as he was, in the stone chamber, holding the bottle. And then his reflection reached into its pocket and closed its hand around something small, and he felt in his own actual pocket something drop into it with the impossible weight of something that had arrived from a direction that wasn't physical. He reached in and pulled out the Philosopher's Stone. It was smooth and blood-red and warm and its magical signature was extraordinary, 1,000 years of preserved life, power held in permanent potential, never discharged, never diminished. Harry looked at it in his palm and understood, in the way that he understood things through feeling rather than reasoning, exactly why Klaus had described what he did as giving Harry something that couldn't be taken away. The stone was the opposite of that, power with a single fragile physical form, power that could be stolen or broken or lost, power that was only as secure as the vault holding it. He closed his hand around it. Quirrell was at the end of the chamber. He was standing very still, his back to the mirror, and his stillness was the real one, not the performance, not the nervous stutter, but the fundamental quality of the thing behind his eyes, which was looking at Harry with a focus so complete it had stripped the performance entirely away. Quirrell was in there somewhere, the man underneath the occupation, but wherever he was, he wasn't in front. "You have it," said Quirrell's mouth, but the voice was different. Layered. 2 vocal registers slightly out of alignment with each other, the way 2 audio tracks started a fraction apart. I felt it move. Yes, Harry said. Give it to me. No, Harry said. Not defiant. Not aggressive. The simple, complete no of someone who has made a decision. Quirrell moved across the chamber and Harry felt the wrongness in him amplify as the distance closed, not the man's magic, the other thing's magic, old and dark and vast in the way of something that had once been very large and was currently compressed into a form it found humiliating. The air temperature dropped sharply, the specific cold of concentrated dark magic, and Harry felt the stone warm in his closed fist against it, holding its own. The bloodlines moved. Not the subtle background movement of normal awareness, a surge, the whole network shifting at once, every vampire on Earth who carried Mikaelson blood suddenly and completely oriented on this chamber. Harry felt it like a wave through the root of what he was, all of it saying the same thing without words, present. With you. Here. 1,000 years of loyal bloodlines and they were all in his closed fist with the stone. Quirrell's hands came up and closed around Harry's throat. The contact lasted perhaps 2 seconds before Quirrell screamed. Not Harry, Quirrell. His hands blistered where they touched Harry's skin, the flesh going white and then cracking the way skin cracked in extreme cold, and Quirrell staggered back with both hands held in front of him, making sounds that were more Quirrell than Voldemort for the first time in months, the genuine human pain of a man whose body had just been used as a weapon against something it fundamentally couldn't harm. What are you? Said the voice from Quirrell's mouth, and this time the two registers were separated, Quirrell's confusion and genuine terror in one, and beneath it the voice that had been a dark whisper in Harry's scar for his entire life, finally audible, finally external, and it sounded less like the monster of myth and more like something that had been defeated before and remembered the experience. Harry looked at Quirrell's ruined hands and then at Quirrell's face, at the man struggling behind the occupation, and felt something he hadn't anticipated, sadness. Not for the thing inside, that would come back, that wasn't finished yet, that was a problem for a later year. For the man. For what the man had chosen and what had been done to him through that choice, the long terrible undoing of a person who had gone looking for power and found something that used the space where he'd been. Get out of him, Harry said, addressing the thing in Quirrell. Not a request. The specific register of someone who has more than enough authority for what they're asking and both parties know it. The chamber went cold enough that Harry's breath clouded. The wrongness in Quirrell intensified, pressed, reached outward toward Harry's mind in the way that old dark magic reached, not subtly, not carefully, but with the blunt force of something that had spent decades using its will as a battering ram. Harry let it press. Let it find what was there to press against. The bloodlines. 1,000 years of Mikaelson power, every thread of it running through him, layered and vast and ancient in a way that made Voldemort's century of dark magic feel recent. The connection between Harry and the Holy Wand, the phoenix feather core whose twin had made the killing curse that hadn't killed. The magic his mother had left in his blood, love magic, the kind that operated outside the normal taxonomy and which Harry had, with Elijah's quiet help over the summer, learned to understand not as a passive shield but as an active property. His mother had changed the rules, and the change was in him, and no amount of will as battering ram was going to batter through his mother's love reinforced by the oldest blood in the world. The thing in Quirrell made a sound that Harry had never heard before and hoped not to hear again, a sound of something enormous and dark encountering something it hadn't expected and understanding, in one cold moment, that it had miscalculated the size of what it was pushing against. Then Quirrell collapsed. Not attacked, not struck, the body simply went down, the way a building came down when the structure that held it left. Quirrell hit the stone floor and was Quirrell again, entirely and only, the occupation gone with the violent suddenness of an eviction, and he lay there breathing in the ragged way of someone who had just been returned to themselves and found the experience extremely unpleasant. The temperature came back up gradually. The chamber air stopped cracking with cold. Harry still had the stone. He looked down at Quirrell, who was moving weakly, alive, present in his own body for the first time in months. He looked at the mirror, which showed nothing now, just reflection, just Harry standing in a stone chamber with a red stone in his hand and a slight frost on the shoulders of his robe. He could feel Voldemort. Not in Quirrell, gone from there, unhoused, reduced to the spectral nothing of a thing that didn't have a body and hadn't had one since 1981. Floating somewhere in the cold air of the chamber, formless and diminished and absolutely furious and absolutely nothing that could touch Harry right now. You'll need a body eventually, Harry thought, not to anyone in particular, just noting it. And when you get one, I'll be here. He heard footsteps behind him. The sound of someone moving through the flame. He turned. Dumbledore stood at the entrance to the chamber in his deep blue robes, the bonfire quality of him filling the space, and he looked at Harry, the stone in his hand, Quirrell on the floor, the frost on the stone, with an expression that was complicated enough to be interesting. Not shock, not quite. More the expression of someone who had written a plan in the full expectation of several possible outcomes and was now looking at an outcome that hadn't been on the list. Harry, he said. Professor, Harry said. A long silence. Dumbledore's eyes moved to Quirrell, to the chamber, back to Harry, doing the calculation behind the half-moon glasses with the speed of a very good mind processing a great deal of information quickly. You should have come to me, Dumbledore said finally, and his voice had the specific quality of someone who meant what they were saying and also knew, as they were saying it, that the argument was already lost. I didn't need to, Harry said. Not unkindly. It's handled. Dumbledore looked at the stone in Harry's hand. May I? He said. Harry held it out. Dumbledore took it with both hands, looked at it for a moment, looked at Harry. Quirrell will need medical attention. Yes, Harry said. He's alive. The thing that was in him is gone. He'll need to explain quite a lot. He paused. I'd rather he was treated fairly. It didn't seem like he had much choice after a certain point. Dumbledore studied him. You are not what I expected, he said, and unlike the version of this sentiment that Draco had offered on the train, Dumbledore's carried real weight, the acknowledgement of someone whose expectations were very well informed encountering something that exceeded them. I know, Harry said. He started toward the exit. At the entrance to the chamber he stopped without turning. The stone needs to be destroyed, he said. Not returned to Flamel. Flamel has enough. The risk of it existing is too large for what it provides. He glanced back. I think you know that. A very long pause. I do, Dumbledore said quietly. Yes. Then I'll leave it with you, Harry said, and walked out. He came back up through the sequence of chambers, the empty potions room, the chess room where the pieces had reset themselves with the stoic acceptance of enchantments that expected to be used, the devil's snare chamber, the trapdoor, and emerged into the third-floor corridor to find Hermione sitting against the wall with both arms around her knees and her face doing something complicated, and Ron beside her with a bloody nose from the chess game that he hadn't done anything about. Apparently having decided that walking to the hospital wing could wait until he knew how the other thing had resolved. Done? Ron said. Done, Harry said. Hermione stood up quickly and looked at him, the specific full-body assessment of someone who needed to confirm that all the relevant parts were present. You're not hurt. No, Harry said. The stone? With Dumbledore. He'll destroy it. She breathed out slowly. And Voldemort? Gone, Harry said. For now. He looked at them both. It won't be permanent. He'll find another way back. But not tonight. Ron wiped blood from his upper lip with his sleeve in the cheerful way of someone who has decided that a bloody nose is a perfectly acceptable cost of admission. Did you at least tell him to get lost properly? Harry thought about the chamber. The cold. The sound the thing had made when it understood what it was pressing against. I think the message was clear, he said. Right, Ron said. Hospital wing, then? Hospital wing, Harry agreed. They walked down the corridor together, all three of them, in the particular aftermath quiet of something finished, the castle noting them with its deep stone approval, or what felt like approval, the wards settling back around them like something returning to a natural state. Harry wrote 2 letters from the hospital wing while Madame Pomfrey fussed over Ron's nose and made observations about first-year students and life choices that were delivered with the professional exasperation of someone who had been saying them for decades and expected to keep saying them. The first letter was to Klaus. "It's done for now. I'm fine. Dumbledore has the stone. The thing that was in Quirrell is gone, unhoused. It's Voldemort, or what's left of him. He'll be back eventually. I know you know that. I want to tell you about what I felt when the bloodlines moved. It was, I don't have the right words yet. I'll find them. I'm fine. I'll be home in 3 weeks. The second letter was shorter. He addressed it to Flamel, the address provided by Elijah with the quiet efficiency of a man who kept comprehensive records, and he wrote only, "The stone is with Dumbledore. It should be destroyed. I believe he'll agree. I'm sorry for the loss of it. Some things matter more than living forever." He folded both letters and gave them to Hedwig, who looked between them with the professional assessment of an owl deciding on a route, and then took both and was gone through the window into the May evening air. Harry lay back in the hospital wing bed and felt the bloodline settle back to their background presence, the crisis pitch of the chamber's moments gone, just the steady tide of 1,000 presences around the world, content and constant. The castle breathed around him. The stone walls older than most things, full of centuries of people learning things in them, and Harry was the newest addition to that continuum, learning things that the castle hadn't held before, new kinds of awareness, new layers of meaning pressed against ancient stone. It was still warm with it. He closed his eyes and did not sleep immediately, just rested, and let himself know that he had done what needed doing without making it bigger than it was. That was a thing Klaus had said in October, in a letter. The test of whether you've handled something well isn't the size of the response. It's whether the response matched the thing. Big responses to small problems are as much a failure as small responses to large ones. He'd matched it. He thought he'd matched it. Through the open window came the sound of the lake and the castle grounds in the last of the evening light, and from somewhere in the school the ordinary noise of 400 students going about their Tuesday night, and none of them knew what had happened 2 floors below and 3 chambers past a dog with 3 sleeping heads, and Harry lay in the hospital wing and was at peace with that and felt no need to change it. The bloodlines moved in their slow, content tide. Home in 3 weeks. He fell asleep to that, and it was enough. Chapter 6, the Heir declared the train back to London had a different quality than the one going up. September's train had been full of the particular kinetic energy of beginnings, the barely contained excitement of first years, the performing casualness of older students who had learned to treat the start of term as beneath getting worked up about while being entirely worked up about it. The June train was something else. The specific exhale of 400 people who had done something for 9 months and were now setting it down, the loose relief of it, the particular tired happiness of term end. Harry sat in the compartment with Ron and Hermione and Neville, and outside the window Scotland gave way to the north of England and then England proper, the landscape softening and greening by degrees. Hedwig was in her cage with the air of an owl who had earned her retirement from the academic year and was considering her options. Neville had passed his end-of-year exams with marks that had surprised everyone except Harry, who had watched him work in the common room all year with the quiet determination of someone who had been told they weren't clever enough for long enough that they'd started using it as fuel rather than accepting it as fact. Neville handled success the way he handled most things, with a slightly overwhelmed sincerity that made it impossible not to be glad for him. "My grandmother wrote that she was pleased," Neville said, in the tone of someone reporting good news that they were still a little afraid of. "She doesn't usually," he stopped. "She said adequately achieved." "Which from her is, that's excellent," Harry said. "It means she didn't follow it with a comparison to my father," Neville said, and the sentence had the quality of a thing that had been thought many times and said rarely, offered now with the tentative honesty of someone testing whether it would be received. "Which is the version of excellent I'm working with." Nobody filled the silence with reassurance, because Harry had learned the Mikaelson approach to real things: let them be real. Ron passed Neville a chocolate frog with the direct practicality of someone who communicated comfort through provisions, and Neville took it and they moved on, but the exchange had mattered and everyone in the compartment knew it. Hermione had been doing something with a piece of parchment on and off since Manchester, writing and crossing out and rewriting in the way she did when she was working toward a conclusion she wasn't ready to share yet. "Say it," Harry said, without looking up from his book. She looked up. "Next year will be different," she said. "He'll come back at some point. You said it yourself, what happened with Quirrell wasn't a resolution, it was a delay." She put down her quill. "I've been thinking about what we don't know. The mechanism for his return. The Horcrux theory." Harry looked at her now. "Where did you find that?" "Restricted section," she said, with the brisk non-apology of someone who considered the restricted section a slightly inconvenient organizational choice rather than an actual prohibition. "There's a reference in a text on soul magic. The theory is that if a person commits an act of sufficient magical violence, they can split a portion of their soul and house it in an object. As long as the object survives, the person can't die," Harry said. "Right," Hermione said. "And your scar is possible," Harry said, quietly. The compartment went very still. Ron had the expression of someone who had understood something unpleasant and was managing the impact. Neville looked between Harry and Hermione with wide eyes that were doing the calculation and not liking the result. "That's why it wasn't finished in the chamber," Harry said. He'd been turning this over since February, a shape at the edge of his understanding that he hadn't had a name for yet. It wasn't just no body. He had anchors somewhere. Things keeping him tethered. "And your scar might be one of them," Hermione said. Carefully. With the specific care of someone who was raising something terrible as information rather than as something to be afraid of. Harry looked at the window. England went past, very green, very ordinary. "I'll tell Klaus," he said. "Tonight. He'll know people who know more about this than any book in Hogwarts will." "And Dumbledore?" Hermione said. "Dumbledore knows about the Horcruxes," Harry said, with the certainty that came from having watched Dumbledore's face in the chamber, the specific quality of the calculation behind those blue eyes when he'd looked at Harry holding the stone. "He's known for a while, I think. He's working toward something." He paused. "He just doesn't know that I know he's working toward something, which is where we're at an advantage." "You're not angry at him," Ron observed. "Not a challenge, just noting it." "Angry at him for what?" Harry said. "For having a plan that involves me. Everyone has a plan that involves me. The vampire world has a plan that involves me. Voldemort has a plan that involves me. Plans involving me are the main feature of my life." He settled back against the seat. "I just intend to be the one executing mine rather than being executed by theirs." Ron looked at Hermione. Hermione looked at Ron. Something passed between them that was the specific communication of two people who had spent a year watching someone operate and had arrived, gradually and somewhat against their initial expectations, at a particular feeling about it. "Right," Ron said. "Well. Let us know what you need." "I always do," Harry said, and looked back at his book, and the train carried them south. King's Cross had the June version of its usual noise, families arriving rather than departing, the specific release of Reunion, parents who had been sending letters for 9 months finally having the actual child back in front of them and finding the experience simultaneously wonderful and slightly overwhelming. Ron disappeared into the Weasley family, which arrived in the form of his mother, his father, the twins, Ginny who had apparently been counting days since September, and Percy who was pretending not to be glad in the specific way of someone who had decided being glad was beneath his current level of dignity. Hermione's parents were quiet and precise and clearly very glad, her mother hugging her with the expression of someone who had been fine all year and was only now admitting they'd been counting too. Neville's grandmother arrived at the barrier like a force of nature, tall, formidable, the kind of woman who wore her hat with the energy of someone who had decided very early in life that the world would simply have to accommodate her preferences, and looked at Neville's marks and looked at Neville and said, in a voice that carried, "Your father would have been proud," which were apparently words Neville had been waiting 11 years for, because his face did something that Harry watched from a respectful distance and catalogued as private and looked away from, because some moments were not for witnesses. Klaus was standing at the barrier. Not on the Muggle side, through it, on the platform, which he had apparently walked through while the guard was not in position to ask questions, because Klaus's approach to barriers was the same as his approach to most forms of restriction, notional at best. He was wearing his dark jacket and had his hands in his pockets, and he was looking at the train with the specific quality of a person who had known something was approaching and was now simply waiting for it to arrive. Harry walked toward him without hurrying. He was aware, in the peripheral way, that several people were noticing Klaus and then noticing who was walking toward Klaus and making adjustments to their understanding of the afternoon. He didn't look at them. Klaus looked at him as he approached with the assessment that was as much habit as anything else, checking, cataloging, reading, the same thing he'd done every time Harry came back from somewhere. Alive. Whole. Himself. All present. "You look like you had a year," Klaus said. "I did," Harry said. "The letters didn't cover all of it." "No," Harry said. "I'll tell you the rest." Klaus nodded. He looked at Harry for a moment longer in the way he did sometimes, not with the performance of feeling but with the bare version, the thing underneath it that wasn't dressed up, and then he tilted his head toward the barrier. "Elijah made dinner. Rebecca has opinions about how it should have been made. You should come home before it escalates." "Critical timing situation," Harry said seriously. "It's always critical with those two," Klaus said, and they went through the barrier together. The Kensington house had changed since September in the specific way of houses that have been lived in, small personal sedimentations, things slightly moved from their original positions, a coffee cup that lived on the study bookshelf now instead of in the kitchen because someone had started taking it there and stopped taking it back. The desk in the front room had different books on it. The garden had been done differently, Rebecca having apparently developed opinions about it over the winter. It smelled exactly the same, which was the relevant thing. Harry put his trunk in his room and stood there for a moment, taking the room back in, the dark blue duvet, the shelf that had been reorganized over Christmas, the desk where he'd written probably 60 letters this year, the window that faced the garden where the light was now evening long in June. His mother's bracelet on his wrist. The wand on the bedside table. His room. Still his room. He went downstairs. He told Klaus and Elijah and Rebecca everything over dinner, properly told them, not the abbreviated field report versions that letters allowed but the full shape of it, with the texture and the doubt and the moments he hadn't been sure, which were fewer than they might have been but were present and he saw no reason to edit them out. They listened the way they listened, Klaus with the quality of something processing and filing and occasionally very still for a second when something landed that required particular thought, Elijah with the uninterrupted attention he gave everything that mattered, Rebecca with her hands around her glass and her eyes moving between Harry's face and the middle distance in the way she did when she was feeling something she was letting herself feel. When he got to the chamber, to Quirrell, to the moment the bloodlines had surged, Klaus set down his fork. Harry described it, the wave of it, the thousand presences quality, the warmth of it going through him in the cold of the chamber, and when he finished there was a brief silence. "That's never happened before," Klaus said. "That level of simultaneous response. I've felt the network move, but not like that. Not all at once. It was like they all knew," Harry said. "Before I needed anything. Like they'd already decided." "They had," Elijah said quietly. "In a sense. When you performed the rite, what you were creating wasn't a transactional relationship. It wasn't protection in exchange for status. It was," he chose the word carefully, "kinship. And kinship moves when its own are in danger in ways that don't require instruction." He looked at Klaus. "You built that over 1,000 years. He carries it now," Klaus said. "Yes," Elijah said. "And he understands what he carries. That matters. Harry held this for a moment. Then he told them the rest: Hermione's theory, the Horcrux research, the shape of what he'd been turning over on the train. Elijah's reaction was the one Harry had been watching for. Elijah didn't go still the way Klaus went still. He went still the way water went still, surface composed, but something moving below it. The scar, he said. It's possible, Harry said. More than possible, Elijah said. He looked at Klaus with an expression that was communicating several things in the vocabulary they developed across 1,000 years. We've encountered soul magic before. The witch in Prague, in 1743. She was using similar methods. Different application, Klaus said. But the theory, he looked at Harry. How certain are you? Certain enough to want it looked at by someone who knows more than I do, Harry said. I'm not guessing. I can feel something in the scar that doesn't feel like me. It's always been there. I thought it was residual from the curse. But residual fades. This doesn't. The silence at the table was a thinking silence rather than a heavy one. I know someone, Elijah said, in the tone he used when he was accessing a contact from a Rolodex that was 1,000 years old and correspondingly extensive. A practitioner. She has more experience with soul magic than anyone I'm aware of. I'll contact her this week. Good, Harry said. And there's the conclave. He looked at Klaus. Your letter in March mentioned it. Klaus looked at him. You think it's time? Quarrel happened, Harry said. Whatever's left of Voldemort is out there looking for an anchor. His followers, the ones who didn't go to Azkaban, the ones who claimed they were under the Imperious curse, they're still around. They know Voldemort isn't fully gone even if they won't say it aloud. He looked at his hands on the table. They've been deciding whether I'm a threat or an opportunity since I was a year old. I'd rather they knew the answer. The formal acknowledgement, Klaus said. In public, Harry said. Not a letter to the Lineage lords. Not a private audience. Something that puts it in front of everyone at once. He looked at Klaus steadily. You've been waiting to do this until I was ready. I'm ready. Klaus looked at him for a long moment. Not testing him, reading him, the same reading he'd been doing since a vault in Gringotts, the constant updating of his understanding of who this person was and what they could hold. Then he looked at Elijah. Make the arrangements, Klaus said. The vampire conclave took place 3 weeks after term ended, on a Wednesday evening in July, in a building in Mayfair that did not advertise its nature and had no need to. It had been a private members' club in the 19th century, the kind that required birth and fortune for membership and kept no formal list because formal lists were for people who needed to prove they belonged, and it had been owned by the Mikaelson family since 1887 and used for exactly the kind of gathering that was happening tonight, which was to say, the kind where the beings attending were not required to maintain human facades and were not particularly interested in doing so. They arrived at 8. Klaus, Elijah, Rebecca, and Harry. Harry had dressed for it with the same consideration he brought to preparation generally. He'd asked Elijah what was appropriate, and Elijah had spent 20 minutes being genuinely useful about the symbolic weight of certain choices, and the result was dark, well-fitted, and spoke of someone who understood that clothes were communication without making the communication labored. He wore his mother's bracelet on his left wrist. The holly wand in his jacket. He felt the assembled bloodlines before they entered the building. Through the walls, through the Mayfair evening, pressing against his expanded awareness with a specific quality of gathered power, 37 gathered vampires, varying ages and strengths, the oldest among them centuries deep, carrying the weight of long lives in the particular way of things that had seen too much to be easily moved. He could feel which ones ran from Klaus's blood and which ones were allied houses, the lineage architecture visible to him now with a fluency that had taken most of the year to develop. They all knew he was coming. They had known since the conclave was announced. He'd felt the network hum with it, the information moving through the bloodlines themselves, faster than any letter, the news spreading at the speed of a thing felt rather than told. The original Heir rite performed on a child had been the subject of extraordinary interest for 11 months. This was the resolution of that interest. How many of them are testing something right now? Harry asked, as they stood outside the building. All of them, Klaus said. Testing what? Whether you'll walk in or be walked in, Klaus said. Whether you arrive as a guest or as what you are. Harry looked at the door. Looked at Klaus. I'll go first, he said. Klaus was quiet for a moment, and in the quiet was something that Harry had learned to read as the equivalent of very significant emotion expressed as minimal external response. Yes, Klaus said. You will. Harry went through the door. The room beyond was large and lit with the specific warmth of firelight and old lamps rather than the cold efficiency of electric light, and it was full of people who were not entirely people, who wore the shape of people with the fluid ease of long practice but who, in the aggregate, created a pressure in the air that was different from any room Harry had been in. Not threatening. Dense. The way rooms with too many books felt dense, the accumulated weight of what they contained. Every head turned when he entered. Harry stopped in the center of the room and let them look. He stood there and made no gesture of deference, offered no social performance of the uncertainty he didn't feel, and returned their attention with the same quality they were giving him, direct, patient, measuring. He let the bloodlines read through him, their extended awareness pressing against his, the old ones among them probing at the edges of what he was with the specific delicacy of something that respected what it was probing. Aldrich Voss was nearest. He caught Harry's eye and gave the same inclined head acknowledgement he'd given in the Kensington sitting room, 8 months ago, which was already a statement to the room. A woman near the fireplace, old in the way mountains were old, small and precise and completely still, looked at Harry with silver eyes and said, in a voice that carried without raising, "You are the boy." "I'm Harry Potter," Harry said. "I'm the Mikaelson heir. And if you're asking whether the rite held, you can feel it as well as I can." A brief silence. Then the woman smiled, not warmly, not coldly, with the specific quality of something that had spent centuries recognizing things worth recognizing. "So it did," she said. "And so you are." Klaus, Elijah, and Rebecca came in behind him. The formal acknowledgement, when it happened, was not the dramatic ceremony that Harry had half expected. There were words, old ones, in the language Klaus had used in the vault, and Harry had learned enough of it over the year to follow the meaning, and a formal registration of the claim in front of witnesses, and each of the lineage lords present made the inclined head acknowledgement that was the vampire world's version of a bow, the gesture of recognition between equals that was neither submission nor challenge but the clean acknowledgement of standing. When it was done, the room changed. Not dramatically, but definitively, the testing quality in the air folded away, the particular tension of something unresolved releasing, and what replaced it was something that Harry had felt only in its background version before. The full weight of 1,000 bloodlines, formally and publicly oriented, pointed like a compass needle at the boy standing in a Mayfair room in July. Not his to command, not his to order. His to call on. His to stand behind and be stood behind by. The distinction mattered and he understood it. A vampire Harry didn't know, younger than most, perhaps 2 centuries, with the bearing of someone who had been a military man before, came to speak to him at the edge of the room, and behind him there were others, and Harry spent the next hour in conversation that moved from politics to history to the mechanics of bloodline allegiance to the question of Voldemort in terms that were frank in the way the vampire world was frank, not pretending the threat wasn't real, not performing the bravery of people who hadn't yet fully imagined what they were talking about. He asked good questions. They gave him real answers. The exchange had the quality of something being established, not a hierarchy, not a transaction, but a working relationship, the kind that ran both ways. Elijah appeared at his elbow at one point with a glass of water and the expression of a man watching something he had expected to go well and was gratified to find going well. "You're doing this correctly," Elijah said quietly. "I've had a good teacher," Harry said. "Several," Elijah said. "But the instinct is yours." Klaus was across the room talking to the silver-eyed woman, and something in the conversation was going in a direction that had moved Klaus to his real stillness, the oldest predator stillness, which meant it was either very good or required careful handling, and from this distance Harry couldn't tell which. He filed it. Rebecca was doing what Rebecca did in rooms full of powerful beings, which was occupy the specific position of someone who needed no position, warmly present, unapologetically herself, speaking to 3 different lineage lords with the easy authority of a woman who had been doing this since before most of the countries represented in the room had existed. Harry watched her handle a particularly stiff-necked vampire from what felt like an Eastern European bloodline with a combination of charm and absolute implacability that resolved the tension in under 4 minutes and left the man looking faintly dazzled. After midnight, when the formal portion had dissolved into the particular conversations of beings who had gathered for a purpose and, having accomplished it, were now simply in the same room together, Harry found himself standing at the window that overlooked the Mayfair street below, the ordinary London night, cabs and a few pedestrians, the amber-lit wet pavement of a city that had been doing this for 2,000 years and would do it for 2,000 more. Klaus came to stand beside him. "The woman with the silver eyes," Harry said. "What did she say?" "Her name is Mireille," Klaus said. "She's 400 years old and she was a Mikaelson ally for most of them and an enemy for a period in the 17th century that neither of us chooses to discuss at length. She said." He was quiet for a moment. "She said that the boy in the room was not what anyone had planned for, but that she thought he might be what was needed. She meant Voldemort specifically and the general state of things generally." "She's right about the second part," Harry said. "Whether she's right about the first, I don't know yet." "No," Klaus said. "You won't know yet. You're 12 in 3 weeks." "Almost 12, Harry said, and the smile was full this time, unguarded, and Klaus looked at it in a way, because some things deserved privacy even from the person they were about. "There's something I need to tell you," Klaus said. "About what Elijah's practitioner found." Harry had been waiting for this since dinner 3 weeks ago, when Elijah had made his call and the practitioner, a woman named Sanera, who had come to the house in Kensington and spent an afternoon in Harry's presence with her eyes half closed and her hands moving through the air around him with the quality of someone reading Braille, had gone quiet for a long time before speaking. "The scar," Harry said. "Yes," Klaus said. "Sanera confirmed what you suspected. There is a fragment of soul in your scar, Harry. Voldemort's. It was placed there the night of the attack, not intentionally, which is significant. He didn't choose you as a vessel. The curse rebounded and the fragment attached by accident, caught in the same magic that protected you." He paused. "It's why you can feel him. It's why the scar sense works. You've been partly connected to what he is since you were 1 year old." Harry looked at the street below. A cab went past, orange light dragged along the wet stone. "Can it be removed?" he said. "Sanera thinks yes," Klaus said. "Eventually. Not now, you're too young and the fragment is too deeply integrated. The magic around it is layered with your own in ways that would make extraction dangerous before your core is fully developed." He looked at Harry. "She thinks 16, perhaps 17. At full magical maturity, it becomes separable. So for the next 4 or 5 years," Harry said, "I carry a piece of Voldemort in my head." "Yes," Klaus said. "But it is not in control of you. It cannot possess you. The bloodlines and your mother's protection are too comprehensive. It's just contained inside you rather than outside you." He looked at Harry steadily. "It doesn't change what you are. It doesn't change tonight. It changes nothing except that you know about it now." Harry held this. He held it the way he'd learned to hold large things, not at arm's length, not crushed to his chest, but with both hands and the knowledge that the holding was temporary, that the large thing would eventually find its proper size once he'd gotten used to the weight. "Does Dumbledore know?" Harry said. "I believe he suspects the mechanism," Elijah said, appearing beside them with the ease of someone who had been nearby for most of the conversation and had been decent enough not to interrupt until the important part was said. Whether he knows the specifics, I can't say. But his strategy has been designed around it, Harry said. Not bitterly. Just with the clean logic of someone assembling pieces. The protection, the sacrifice, the greater good. He looked at Elijah. He thinks at some point I'll need to let Voldemort kill me. To destroy the fragment. I think that was his working theory, yes, Elijah said carefully. Before you became what you are. It's not a valid theory anymore, Harry said. Sonara's method doesn't require that. Does it? No, Elijah said. It requires time and precision and someone who knows what they're doing. It does not require Harry Potter to die. He said it with the specific firmness of someone closing a door on a possibility. That is not an outcome we are working toward. That has never been an outcome we are working toward. Harry nodded slowly. He looked back at the street. He's genuinely trying to do the right thing, Harry said. Dumbledore. I want to be clear that I understand that. He's not wrong about the stakes. He's not wrong that Voldemort has to be stopped and that I'm central to it. A pause. He's just working with a version of me that doesn't exist anymore. And he doesn't know it yet. He'll work it out, Klaus said. He's too good not to. When he does, Harry said, he'll either revise or escalate. Yes, Klaus said. Either way, we'll handle it, Harry said. Not bravado. Fact. Klaus looked at him for a moment, with the full, unperformed version of what he felt, the thing that didn't get said because the Mikaelson dialect handled it better through presence than words. Then he said, yes. We will. They stayed at the window for another moment, the three of them, and below them London went about its ordinary midnight business with complete indifference to the things that had been decided above it this evening, and the bloodlines were the warm constant tide they were every moment, and in the building behind them 37 vampires of varying centuries talked and moved in the firelight, all of them tilted very slightly toward the 12-year-old at the window the way plants tilted toward light. They left Mayfair at 1 a.m. and drove back to Kensington through empty streets, and Harry sat in the back with Rebecca and she was telling him about something that had happened in Paris over Christmas, a story that kept expanding in scale, as Rebecca's stories tended to. The original incident involving a misplaced painting and escalating through several European capitals before arriving at a conclusion that was probably only partially accurate and entirely entertaining. Harry listened and laughed once at the part about the French minister, and Rebecca looked at him with the particular satisfaction of someone who has been trying to make a specific person laugh since they met them. Good, she said. Good, he said. He meant it to cover more than the story. She seemed to know that, because she leaned over and rested her head on his shoulder for the last 10 minutes of the drive with the ease of something that had decided it was allowed, and Harry let her, and looked out the window at the city passing, and thought about what the year had made him, what he'd gone into it as and what he was coming out of it as, and the difference between those two things. He was not the boy in the vault anymore. Not the child learning not to apologize for existing, not the person being taught that quiet was all right, that space was his, that the door locked from the inside. That boy had been real and those lessons had mattered and he would not pretend otherwise. But he was not that anymore. He was Harry Potter and he was the Mikaelson heir and he was the scion of 1,000 bloodlines that would come when he called, and he had walked into a room full of things that had lived for centuries and made them incline their heads, and he had dealt with the fragment of Voldemort in his scar with the same practical equanimity with which he dealt with everything, as information, as a problem with a timeline and a solution, not a sentence. He had friends who had followed him into a trapdoor without being asked to, and a brother who had given his nose to a chess game without complaint, and a sister who corrected his sister with the ease of someone who had decided the question was settled. He had a family. It was the most extraordinary thing he'd ever been given, and it had been given to him in a vault, in the dark, by a man following a pull he couldn't explain, and it was, in the specific way of things that had found their correct place after a long time of being in the wrong one, absolutely right. The car pulled up outside the Kensington house. Harry got out and looked up at the black door with its brass fittings, the lavender in the window box going wild in the July night, the light on in the study that meant Klaus would be awake for another few hours with books and bourbon and his own particular thoughts. He went inside. He went upstairs and stood in his room for a moment, the dark blue duvet, the shelf, the window, his room, and then he sat on the bed and took off his jacket and held the holly wand for a moment, feeling the warmth of it, the settled rightness of phoenix and holly and the 10 months of magic worked through it. He put it on the bedside table and lay down. The bloodlines did their slow tide. The Kensington house was warm and quiet. From downstairs came the faint sound of a page turning in the study, and from somewhere outside the night city of London went about its permanent business, ancient under its modern surface, layer upon layer, stone on stone. Harry closed his eyes. He thought of his mother's note, kept now in the drawer of his desk, "Whatever happened, you should know that you were wanted," and thought that she had been right, that he was wanted, that he had found the proof of it and was carrying it home. He thought of Voldemort, fragmented, unhoused, somewhere in the dark between one attempt and the next, regrouping with the patient malice of something that didn't give up. He thought about Dumbledore revising his theory. About Hermione's notes on Horcruxes. About Neville's grandmother saying your father would have been proud and the specific quality of relief in Neville's face that was like something set down after years of carrying it. About Draco Malfoy on the train in September, walking into a compartment that wasn't his plan and sitting down anyway. About Ron on the chess board saying you'll need to take me with the easy calm of someone who knew the value of a sacrifice and was making it without drama. About 1,000 bloodlines breathing. He was almost 12 and he had been alive for less than a decade and he had already done more than most people would do in a lifetime, but the doing of it had not made him hard or narrow or careful in the way of people who had been hurt into caution. He was none of those things. He was open, he was ready, he was present in his own life in a way that felt new and permanent both at once. He was not afraid. He was, in the particular vocabulary of a boy who had spent a year learning to name his own states, looking forward. And outside the Kensington townhouse on a July night in London, the city breathed its old stone breath, and upstairs in a room with a dark blue duvet and a shelf of books and a window facing a garden, the Mikaelson heir slept. The bloodlines breathed with him. Still. Settled. Home.